Yeah. Shall we start? Shall we begin?
Since this is a joint committee, it consists of 7 members. I'm going to call the attendance of all 7 council members. Councilmember Morrell, Councilmember Moreno. She's here.
I'm here.
Councilmember Jeruso, Councilmember Harris,
Here.
Councilmember King, Councilmember Green, Councilmember Thomas. We have a quorum of the Budget Committee. We do not have a quorum of the Quality of Life Committee.
Come on, man. All right, well, I'll just go ahead and get started. We can't approve the minutes of the Quality of Life Committee, but do you want to approve the minutes of your Budget Committee?
Move to approve the minutes from the Budget Committee, second by Councilmember Moreno. Three yeas, no nays, it carries.
All right, item number 2 is ordinance calendar number 33983 by Councilmember Morrell.
Well, thank you. I think the presenter is actually Mr. Mulligan, but this is essentially the ordinance I filed last December where we were looking at establishing additional definitions for what may declare blight and public nuisance. I've been working with code enforcement, Mr. Mulligan in particular, trying to figure out what is feasible and
blight and public nuisance order. So, and the operational effect that this would have. In code enforcement, our typical process is we hold a hearing against a blighted property and impose fines. That's the way we incentivize compliance with the law. In addition to the fines, the hearing officer could also lodge 1 or more orders. And this is an example of that, a blight and public nuisance order. And the order really does 4 things. So first, it's a precondition for a criminal blight charge. If you wanted to file a misdemeanor criminal blight charge under the state statute, you got to have this order in place. The second thing, it reduces the redemption period for taxes from 3 years to 18 months. Third, it aids NORA in expropriation of property. And fourth, it is relevant to the state's acquisitive prescription laws. So if you have a property that is a blight and a public nuisance, and you want to do that, adversely possess it, the relevant time is 3 years rather than 30. Now, this is a relatively rare effect, although in fact we have a case like this happening on Soniat Street right now, so it does arise. This particular legislation, I think, is aimed at a universe of properties that doesn't fall under those currently eligible for a blight and public nuisance order. So at the beginning of the section, it talks about properties that are uninhabitable or hazardous, or also properties that violate 1 or more provisions of the code, which for us is the minimum property maintenance code. And so I think its net effect would get those properties which are vacant and then don't meet these criteria set forth under paragraph B, the 3 criteria there. And so we don't really have, we certainly have no problem with legislation like this. I think it is a powerful tool. The one thing I would mention is just to be careful that this language doesn't further restrict us. And I think the natural interpretation of the language is that it doesn't, that it complements when we can use this order in the 2 ways set out in paragraph A. But that would be the only thing that comes to mind for me. So this would slightly expand the universe of properties eligible for a blight and public nuisance order. And that would certainly be a help to some degree in our code enforcement efforts.
Councilmember Moreno.
Thanks. Just a logistical question so that I can better understand. Take me through the decision-making process as to when something is going to be targeted as criminal blight, or when something's going to be targeted like the car wash situation that was where the business was torn down? Like why go criminal blight one way and tearing down, with the car wash situation?
Sure. So emergency demolition is used when we have a property that poses an imminent danger to life, health, property, or public safety. So most typically the building is collapsing, but it's also my judgment that if it's a source of serious criminal activity, for example, that is an imminent danger for which emergency abatement via demolition is appropriate. And demolition is not a decision I can make unilaterally, but it's a decision that requires the approval of the Director of Safety and Permits as well. And so we have, for example, a number of cases of homes which maybe are structurally sound, but are badly blighted, being used to house weapons. This has happened on 3rd Street, for example. And in my judgment, those are suitable for emergency abatement via demolition. Now, the criminal blight order, which I am hoping to operationalize, and I have made referrals for criminal blight charges, I think should be used sparingly, but they should be used. Now we're talking not about a property per se, but really about an owner who has the capability to fix a blighted property, who has been given chance after chance to do so, but for whatever reason refuses, and maybe has the resources to tie the city up in frivolous litigation. And in those cases, I think it's appropriate to consider criminal blight. So that's really, it's about, for each property, although there are well-defined classes of properties that have clear remedies that we should pursue, for each property, we have to take a strategic look at it. What's been tried before? What's the legal posture? Is there litigation? What are the routes available to us given the orders that we have? So it's on a case-by-case basis.
Got it. For the car wash, was that still operating as a car wash, or did it no longer operate? Was it just?
It was no longer operating as of recently. I'm not sure, Councilmember Moreno, when it ceased operations.
Got it. The only reason why I asked that is because the council recently passed the padlock ordinance, where it gives the New Orleans police chief the ability to take a look at, potential businesses that harbor crime or where crime is occurring. And she can take some very specific action with plenty of due process that could then lead to not only padlocking the business, but abatement of issues and meeting with the property owner and coming up with a bunch of different plans and things like that. Was that ever considered?
Well, I can't say in particular whether the NOPD considered that route. We received the recommendation from the Violent Crime Task Force. We have our own legal requirements, and I reviewed that. And in my judgment, that a property did meet the criteria for emergency demolition. The Director of Safety and Permits concurred on that. And so that's the route we have taken. Can't speak too much about the case because there is active litigation. But I'm sorry, I'm not sure what the NOPD might have considered in lieu of that.
Does the task force have additional properties that they plan to demolish?
Well, I can tell you as a task force member, Council Member Moreno, I will be bringing properties to the task force. Really, we are going to demolish them anyway using our powers, but I think it is important with an entity like that, that all the resources of the city be brought to bear. So we have properties that we know have been the home of criminal activity, and so that's why we want to pursue them. I think it is important that other stakeholders who participate in that task force are aware of that as well.
And we appreciate you taking the lead on that. Are any of these properties that you're looking to demolish, are any of them businesses?
Well, I'm trying to think. Active businesses, no. Certainly businesses in the sense of derelict apartment complexes, yes. But in terms of an active business, nothing comes to mind. But I would have to review our files to be sure of that.
Yeah, and I think it would be important also to make sure that you meet with, I would say all the members of the council, but in particular, the district council members, to talk to them about the different properties in their district that you're looking at demolishing due to the fact of the blight and criminal activity that's occurring in these buildings.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you.
Councilman Druso.
Thank you. Good afternoon. You said something that caught my ear, which was that you've made referrals on some of the criminal blight. To whom have those referrals been made?
Those referrals have been made to the law department.
How many, Mr. Mulligan?
The initial batch was 2.
Two. How long ago have those been pending?
They were made in October.
And what is the status of them?
The status is, I believe, that the summonses need to be served on the 2 targets of those criminal actions.
Okay, but I guess, and you're not the law department. I want to be very clear about that so we can take it up with them. But you made referrals on 2 properties now, November, December, January, February, March, almost 6 months ago, and we still don't have summonses issued to those properties. So just, I don't need a lot of explanation unless you want it.
Well, I don't have visibility, and I'm not sure it would even be appropriate for me to get involved in their legal process, but to the best of my knowledge, that is correct.
Okay, well, I guess for everybody sitting up here, let's kind of put a pin in that and come back to it with the law department, because and I don't want to pontificate too much here, but we're trying to make sure, I guess, 2 things. One, that laws are being forced. I think a little bit to Councilmember Moreno's point, that there's consistency and predictability about how it's being done. And we know that you're trying to make those efforts, but I just want to make sure that we understand what's happening both on the residential and the commercial properties. Thank you, sir.
Councilman Harris.
Thank you. Tom, thank you to you and your team for all of the blight remediation work that you've done in District B. I know there's a lot more to be had, and I know that our hands are tied a lot by legal process. So if you could talk about that. I know, for example, the Josh Bruno properties that we're trying to get demolished on Washington Avenue. Can you tell me why your hands are tied on getting those properties demolished or having Bruno demolish them? Or can you explain to the council members?
Yes, ma'am. So we have our emergency powers, and we also have the ability to demolish via an order from a hearing officer in less severe cases of blight. But the owners can always, and when they have resources, frequently do take appeals to civil district court. And then, of course, we have to respect the orders of the judge, a temporary restraining order, whatever the case may be.
Okay.
But I do want to say, and I was going to return to this in my remarks on code enforcement, I do believe that the processes work. And I think if we have good collaboration between code enforcement, operational personnel, law, the community, we can get the result we're looking for. So just as an example, the property you were mentioning, I think 2119 Washington Avenue, Bruno property, badly blighted. The city evacuated residents from it. We have a case, we want to demolish it. He did get I guess, a temporary restraining order. And then we sat down in code enforcement with law and said, we still think demolition is appropriate. We are on the right side of the law here. Let's go in and make that case to the judge. And they did that. There was a hearing on March 17th, and the judge agreed and lifted our ability to, or the restraining order against us, as I understand the legal posture. Now, the judge did allow 30 days to appeal, so we'll see if he wants to incur those expenses and appeal. But I do strongly feel that as long as we are on the same page about this sort of thing, and we keep focused and keep pushing these cases forward, we will get to the result that we want. Another example would be, I think it was the 2600 block of Laurel Street. There was a large multifamily complex there, had been blighted for many years, and the residents were understandably upset. They wanted it demoed right now. And I certainly appreciated those sentiments. But as I expressed to them, there's a process. We have to go through the process. We need your help. We need what you've seen as a result of having this blighted property in your community, how it's affected you. And we didn't get it down in 1 month. We did get it down in 3 months. And so I think our processes by and large work well. The question is just, can we all be coordinated to get to the result we want? And can we keep the pressure on?
Thank you. And demolition really is the first step. So for example, the property owner still retains the land of the demolished property, but the cost of demolition goes to that property title. Is that correct?
Yes,
Or
ma'am, that's
explain
right.
how that goes.
That's right. So if we do an emergency demolition, for example, maybe it costs $10,000, we will hold a cost hearing so that a hearing officer can certify that that's a reasonable cost. And then that will get passed along to the owner. So the owner still retains ownership of the property. Our hope is that he or she would do something productive with it, but certainly ensure at the very least it complies with the law. But then that's not our business anymore. We've remedied the emergency conditions, and so it's out of our hands to some degree.
I mean, but what we don't want is we demolish something and then it starts growing grass and it's just one of these empty lots that also is a nuisance property. So how can we close that loophole? Or do you want to work with us on closing that loophole? I think is the better question.
Well, I think so. Ultimately with all these properties, the key is you got to get it in the hand of an owner who wants to do something with it. And so I do think each property needs to be evaluated on a case by case basis. What resources does the owner have? Was he or she even aware of the problem in the first place? How do we get to that point of the ultimate abatement, which is probably building a structure that somebody wants to live in or somebody wants to rent out or create a business on? And I certainly am happy to work with the council on any new tools that could facilitate that end.
Great, thank you.
Before we get to public speakers, I want to make a couple of comments. I appreciate your interpretation of the law, Mr. Mulligan. I think it's important to note where the law was and why we changed it. The law that exists currently, when you're talking about section 23.6, A, the language that we're changing, proposing to change is any vacant commercial or residential premises that has not been occupied or otherwise use in the furtherance of a commercial or residential purpose than the preceding 2 or more years, and for which no plans to alienate, lease, or imminently occupy or otherwise use in the furtherance of a commercial or residential purpose may be declared blight and public nuisance by a hearing officer. Part of the reason why we took the time over that time period to really redefine that is, as an attorney, when I read that, I read that as extremely ambiguous. And as you know, when we are the government trying to enforce the law on a property right, ambiguity is interpreted against our position. So what we're changing it to is really defining what blight is in a very distinct and specific way. In particular, we define it as a vacant structure that is in a condition not immediately fit for the use or occupancy of a structure of its type, that doesn't have electrical service, water service, sewer service, other utilities customarily required, and the like. And the reason for that is, and I think I speak for pretty much 99% of the citizens of the city of New Orleans, we have blighted property, residential property, that has been gutted and remained untouched since Hurricane Katrina. And for neighbors and for communities that have come back and rebuilt their homes to be in a neighborhood where potentially there are trees that are abutting from the inside of the house towards growing out of it, for people to have come back and made the decision to return to the city when you're almost 2 decades later and property remains fallow. I think historically, and this predates your time and my time as well, Mr. Mulligan, that ambiguity has allowed people to get away with doing the bare minimal. And by bare minimal, I mean, you can drive through this house and see tens of thousands of properties with plywood over the windows that have been gutted, that have had no work and have had electrical poles that have rotted and fallen over. And by redefining blight with very specific criteria, it empowers your office to go very simply and say, there's no sewer to this house, there's no electric, there's no wiring, there's nothing. If you don't bring this house to spec as a home, or at least present a contract with the construction company to do so, it's blight. Because what people are frustrated with, and I know in many of my councilmembers' districts, is that they're tired of calling about the grass being cut every 3 to 6 months. The city doing what it can, which is to find them for the grass of the blighted house with plywood, and then that property owner cutting the grass and disappearing again until our overwhelmed code office can get back to find them again for the grass. And it's a cycle. It's a cycle that's been going on pretty much for 2 decades. By us redefining what blight is, cutting the grass is no longer enough. If you've got a residential property in a neighborhood, if you've got, in the East in particular, you've got townhomes that are abutted to inhabited townhomes that are uninhabited blight. And by having clear definitions of that piece of property doesn't have water, sewer, doesn't have electricity, you got to do something with it or we're going to tear it down. It just makes your job easier and the law department's job's easier, because when they go to that judge to say, this is a blighted property, we want to take the next step, the judge is going to look at the clear law and say, well, there's no real ambiguity here to say that, oh, under the previous law, otherwise use in the furtherance of a commercial or residential purpose. They could say, someday I might build a townhome there that theoretically meets the criteria. We're chopping the knees off there at that. So I think this is going to be a tremendous resource. I think it will be immensely gratifying for all of our citizens that now when they complain about blighted property, it's going to have a simplified and almost expedited process for y'all to get to a determination, because you can contact Energy, Sewage, and Water Board and the like and say, well, we haven't seen electrical power this building in 6 months. It's a blight unless you prove different. So I think it'll be useful. I know that we're going to get into it when we do code enforcement shortly, as far as the needs your office is going to face with the additional work this is going to put on y'all. But I think this is a tremendous opportunity for us to really bring a lot more property back into commerce, because in a city with an affordable housing crisis, having 75,000 plus blighted properties that are uninhabited is just not acceptable. So I really appreciate all of the work, and I cannot emphasize how much work Mr. Mulligan has obviously done with my office to get this ordinance to where it is. And I look forward to working with you after we hopefully get it passed at the full council meeting.
Thank you, sir.
We're not taking any votes on this today, so I'm okay reverting this back to whatever part of the agenda that you'd like to go to.
Okay, I think there are a couple public comments on this.
Oh, sorry, there's two. Mr. Robert Paul Lowe, and after him, Mr. Michael Burnside.
You concerned just about about the places, the buildings. What about the people, the tarot card readers that are violating the code by charging set fees on Bourbon Street and in Jackson Square? I'm a reader and I stick to the code. I mean, letter to letter. There are no words in there for tip or donation. So people ask, I said, well, you can get me a piece, you can offer me a tip or donation, but I cannot mention money because code says I cannot. I'm not allowed legally to do so. But you've got readers out there in Jackson Square charging $90 for a card reading. You got readers on Bourbon Street. Like one specifically, William Marshall, he goes by bill. He's charging each individual reading $30 to $45 or more. And that creates a blight on the city's economy because he's not paying taxes, yet he charges per Venmo, Square, Cash App, PayPal, credit cards. You've got these obnoxiously huge signs that they use. I have two little bitty signs put on each side behind my head. These guys are creating a nuisance, a public nuisance, because they insist that the people pay them at the readings, and that causes a problem for the tourists as well as the local businesses. William is been banned from Cafe Beignet on Bourbon on 300 block and Daiquiri Delights on Bourbon because he's obnoxious, he's rude. He insists persistently that people pay him. If someone gets up to walk away, he says, you have to pay me for your reading. That creates a public nuisance for me personally, because I do what the code says, the fortune teller code. I've read it. I have it on one of my phones. Mr. Fiore looked it up for me, researched and sent it to me as a link. I looked it up and kept it on a phone. But if these men and women are charging set fees, that creates a public nuisance for everybody. And
Thank you for your comments, Mr. Lowe. Code enforcement is here. I think you have given quite a bit of information on potential public nuisance, and I'll make sure I look into it.
thank you, sir.
Thank you. Mr. Burnside.
Well, Michael Burnside, 2215 Felicity. It was interesting listening. I learned quite a bit. I didn't realize that there was an adverse possession that was only for 3 years. I know that Louisiana is a very outlier. You need many more years here under normal circumstances than many others. Many other states do 7 years. So it was interesting to learn about Sonyet Street. Very interesting. It's also interesting to understand that the emergency demo has to do with property and that the criminal blight has to do with the owner. The distinction is pretty important. I think Ms. Councilperson Harris's comment about getting rid of a building isn't necessarily getting rid of a problem, nor is it necessarily building an opportunity. We have a lot of vacant lots in this city. We have at least as many vacant lots as we have blighted buildings. And to simply turn blighted buildings into vacant lots may get us down a road we want to travel, but surely it doesn't get us to the destination we seek to achieve, 2019. So this is all predating Thomas Mulligan's entrance into his current position, and he seems very energetic and capable, so maybe events will change as things unfold. Title research, however, has been a black hole for many years. The next thing I want to mention is churches. A lot of this fining that the code enforcement does is then attached to a property tax, which is fine unless, of course, you don't actually pay any property tax, in which case there's really no property tax lien possible. I'm trying to fight a situation where a nonprofit went defunct in 2018, and they've had vacant lots with plenty of grass mowed over the years. And it's very difficult, very, very difficult to get anything done because they don't have any taxes. They don't have tax liens. They're a nonprofit. They went defunct in 2018, and the world just ignores the fact that they own a lot of vacant, well, nowadays they only own a few vacant lots that still grow grass.
Mr. Burnside, that's your time.
That's my time. Got it.
Thank you. Madam Chair, we now have a quorum of quality of life, so if we could have a vote, I would appreciate it.
Okay,
We have two online comments as well.
Oh,
okay.
okay, sorry.
The first online comment comes from Carmelita McKee. And the comment reads, I am totally in support of any enhancement that strengthens the ability of code enforcement to bring chronically negligent property owners into compliance and or seize their properties. One of the major grievances of homeowners and business owners who are doing everything right is the singing endless revolving door for negligent homeowners to pay fines and fall out of compliance for years on end. We definitely need to have a 3 strikes and you're out type system. If it is proven that a property owner is negligent for the same issue within a fixed amount of time, in my opinion, that property owner is showing disdain for the neighborhood and the system. Then the last comment is from Clifford Dugar. The comment reads, under the Claiborne overpass has to be addressed. Not fair to the residents and businesses that use that area for parking and events. Fencing there as it is at Canal and Claiborne should be installed. Thanks. That completes the comments.
Thank you. You want to move? Oh, that's right. I'll move. Seconded by Councilmember Jeruso. And this will advance to the full council. And then can we go ahead and approve the minutes of the Quality of Life Committee? We have a quorum now. I'll move. Seconded by Councilmember Jeruso. All right, great. I will turn it over to the Chair of the Budget Committee.
Thank you. Today begins our quarterly budget process that we were doing in concert with the administration. The way that I wanted to do it was have these as joint meetings with relevant committees. So that way we could work in tandem, given all of the work that the chairs of those committees do. So today we'll have code enforcement, park and parkways, EMS and fire department. If anybody has any timing issues, I'm happy to rearrange the order so they're not sitting here for too long. But with that, I know everybody has made a presentation, and I think the two things, at least I'm the most interested in at a macro level, is what's going on with the number of employees in every office, both in terms of numbers and hiring processes. And then two, with the council having allocated ARPA to people, sort of where we stand on spending and any impediments that we have. And I want to say out loud that I think one of the things I'd like to work on next is how we make the procurement process easier for different departments and for the CAO's office, because I don't like things getting hung up unnecessarily because of laws or regulations, and want to make sure that we find the right balance between giving department heads the freedom they need to be able to operate within a system, but also making sure there's necessary accountability. So with that, Mr. Mulligan, since you're here, we'll start off with code enforcement.
Yes. Good afternoon, Councilman
Good afternoon.
Caruso. Ladies and gentlemen, very happy to be here today on behalf of the 40 men and women of the Department of Code Enforcement who work hard every day to make our city safer and a more pleasant place to live. And I'm honored to be their director. I have a few comments. I'd like to give an overview of the department from a budgetary and administrative perspective. And I'm going to step through it with some care because code enforcement is complicated. And I'm going to give some a bit of detail on why that's the case. Of course, I'll answer any questions you have about that. One thing I'll mention right at the start is that one of my major priorities, not just as the director of code enforcement, but as the deputy CAO for business and external services, has been to simplify the budgeting and the administration of code enforcement. And I believe very strongly that our operational success turns on having simple, transparent, and effective administration. One example of this, I took over as director in April, and first order of business was revamping the administration of our lot abatement program. And the year prior, we cut, I think, about 1,700 lots. And last year, April to the end of the year, we cut over 4,000, so more than doubled. And that is due to a number of factors, but one of the factors, a really important factor, was simplifying the administration of that program and making sure that the administration served the operational end that we wanted, which was getting the grass cut. So I mentioned here on this slide, we're funded from a variety of sources. HUD has traditionally been our sole source of funding, but that has changed now. We received mid-year funds last year and we'll be receiving similar funds moving forward for reasons I'll get into. General fund, we generate revenue in-house as well. Last year, we generated $2.5 million in revenue for the city, and that's not, we imposed a lot more than that in fines, in profits from sheriff sale, but that's literally what came in the door, $2.5 million. And that's an unusual feature of code enforcement, is that it has this revenue generation component as well. Something salient is this $12.5 million in one-time funds. So these are two fund balance projects, the details of which I'll get into. We also embarked on a new CEA with the Downtown Development District last year. So they're providing funding for a dedicated researcher and a dedicated inspector to improve the material condition of the district. So we're excited about that. And that partnership, I think, is going quite well now that the first quarter is coming to a close, first quarter of partnership with them. And also this includes the city attorneys. So let me talk a little bit about personnel. In code enforcement proper, that is people who report to me as the director, we have 33 people. In addition, though, we have 7 lawyers or paralegals who report to Latifah Harris, who's in the law department, and that's their chain of command up to the law department. But they are absolutely essential parts of what we do in code enforcement. Latifah Harris does a great job, and so they're really part of the code enforcement family. So when you think of code enforcement, that's it, 40 people total between law employees and code enforcement proper. I mentioned the HUD funding, and our employees, our line employees, inspectors, researchers, office workers are paid 70% HUD, 30% city. And so that has a few effects. One effect is that it's an administrative requirement that we have to track, do compliance on, but it also affects our operations. So for example, if we have a property uptown that needs to be inspected, but which doesn't fall within a HUD compliant area. And so about half the city very roughly is HUD eligible and about half the city geographically is not. It's sort of not enough to have an inspector who is available, but we have to have an inspector who has not exhausted his or her non-HUD time. So that's, of course, we're very happy to get this federal funding and are excited to continue to do so in the future. But it's an operational element that we have to keep in mind when we're divvying out the work. All right, in terms of current vacancies, requisitions, we have 3 vacancies. So one management development specialist. This is Devin Hulbert, whom I think many of you knew, our council liaison. He left last month. So we got the register last week and we'll be rehiring for that position. I was very happy to see a new code enforcement inspector position be approved. So we made an offer last week, last Thursday, to a candidate. I hope he accepts that. And then we have a vacancy for a researcher, a case specialist. And I'll talk a little bit more about this later on. The register is very small. I think there are 5 people on it. They aren't viable candidates for us. So we're looking at other ways to try to attract people. So for example, looking at other registers, identifying candidates who have the requirements for that position, and then we're going to encourage them to apply for the case specialist. And I do want to mention, because this is something, as I've investigated hiring and investigated administration, these are vacancies, substantive vacancies, in the sense that if I can just find somebody, I can hire them. I can go from 40 to 41 people. But there are also like what you could call on paper vacancies. So for example, Director of Code Enforcement is in the system a vacancy, but I'm the Director of Code Enforcement. So in order to hire for that, I would have to give up my position and we'd go from 40 to 40. So when I think of vacancies, I want to know, how do we grow the department? How do we increase its operational capacity? And so in that case, we have these 3 vacancies we're pursuing. We have these 8 active requisitions, which are in the system, which you see here. I'll mention one change. Those 7 with budget have now been approved. So now they've moved to the next step, which is CAO's office. And in additional 2 positions, which we're working on civil service with to identify what the right classification is a budget coordinator and essentially a manager of our back office staff. And these positions are really critical because what you see at the end of the day, whether it's a fine or whether it's a building coming down, is just the final step in a long process that begins with a complaint really, but requires a lot of paperwork, a lot of legal working with law, inspections, title research, sending out notices. This requires office workers. This requires researchers. This requires, of course, our legal team. It requires inspectors. It requires the people who present things at hearing. And so I think it's very important, as I mentioned, to get that administrative piece right. We've lost about 22 positions since the onset of the pandemic, and we've been authorized to make 9 hires in that intervening time. And one thing I do want to point out is that those losses have occurred over several years. So those, let's say, missing positions didn't all appear at the end of last year. This has been a several-year process. And what we're focused on is simply evaluating our current capacity, looking at what the law requires of us and what we need to execute our mission. And I do think that these initial 11 requisitions, again, of which 1 has been fully approved at this point, perhaps wouldn't be fully sufficient, but I think would go an enormous way towards fulfilling that need.
Mr. Mulligan, the board is almost completely lit up right now. So do you mind answering the questions right now as people have them on their mind with personnel? I know you have, I think, one more real substantive slide.
Of course, whatever you like.
Yeah, why don't we go through them, because I think they're burning on people's minds. So Councilmember Thomas, then President Morrell, then Councilmember Henderson.
And Chairman, I'm not gonna belabor this. Several of us will probably say the same things the same way on the same stuff. I just want to use some of your comments about deployment and resources, because what we're trying to understand is that even though we have resources now, there seems to be a major backlog. Do we have the labor or the workforce now to match the resources to catch us up? Is that possible in this current environment with the amount of backlog that we have, especially when we talk about code enforcement? And I'm asking that question because, you know, we constantly hearing about more resources, but is the public getting a false sense of that because we have more resources, we're going to catch up when we don't have the labor or the workforce to even match the resources?
Well, Councilmember Thomas, when I talk about resources, I'm talking primarily about people. So, for example, an inspector needs something like a car, a tablet or a phone to put the cases into, but you're absolutely right that it all, and this is going to be one of my concluding comments, it does turn on having the labor. And we are a department, which now I've had a long opportunity to evaluate. We are a department that certainly could benefit from new ideas and could benefit maybe from technology a little bit, but those are marginal changes. To really have an effective code enforcement effort, we need people. We got a lot of work to do. That work requires paperwork, research, inspection. And so that is the major bottleneck. The title research is a little different, and I'm happy to get into that. I was planning on doing so. But I think to your point, when we think about resources, we should really be thinking about people.
Okay, so that brings me to the other point. As I studied the history, and I like to go from department to department talking to folk, right? All the technology is fine, but you really get a good sense of it when you talk to that person in code enforcement, that person in permitting. One of the common themes is they all have these files, right, that are piled up. And even if they want to get to something that's been there, it's very difficult because there's an order. And of course, you're always concerned about using political relationships to put someone in the front of a stack or a pile. What can we do given the realities of the labor we have right now in your analysis? And first of all, thank you for what you've done. I think you've gotten more done in a shorter period of time than I have seen even before I got reelected again. What can we do? How do we, well, not whether we right size our force, but in terms of right size it to begin to deal with the backlog? Because, and I asked that question because there was backlog before people were complaining about having labor shortages. And now there's backlog and we're having labor shortages. So it's just about labor, or is it just about how we deploy and how we interact and how we do our job?
Well, I think when we think about a backlog, I mean, the city is constantly changing. New cases are coming in, things are getting resolved. From my perspective, the backlog is primarily a labor issue. There are things which you could look at backlog different ways. Backlog in title research, backlog in complaints we've received, backlog in our communications to various entities. We have a general backlog. It's certainly true, just by virtue of not enough people to respond to complaints, to open the cases, to inspect. The biggest backlog is in title research. And that I think requires, and that's why I was very happy to see this fund balance project engaging a private firm to try to clear it.
And I asked that question for a reason, right? Because there's backlog. And then when you look at code enforcement, there's that 5, 10, 15, 20-year complaint that's back law. So you have the immediate pile up, and then you have the back log. So how do we get to this current stuff that's happening right now when we have the back law? Because a lot of these properties have been around a long time. They've been nuisances a long time. They've needed code enforcement's attention a long time. So is it just the backlog, or is it how we remediate, and in terms of the system allowing us to be able, because we haven't even dealt with the front log, and now we got the backlog. So it has always been backlog. So how do we get to a system where we can eliminate the backlog to get to the backlog?
Well, I think I'll refer to something I mentioned earlier, which is that really, I mean, there are certainly old properties, as you say, that have been on our radar for some time. I mean, we do take action against them. So La Quinta Inn is an example of that in your district, and that was part of that old backlog and the way we dealt.
That was backlog.
Well, the way we deal with some of them is just we make it a priority. We hear from the council offices, especially, this is a priority for us. And then it becomes a priority for the office.
But surely someone called about that property before I did.
Yeah.
Surely some council person or some staff person or some neighborhood person talked about it before. Why should it be magical because I complained about it?
Well, we have to, I mean, there's one question about how to prioritize property. So the answer is, how do we clear the backlog? We need to throw bodies at this problem. That's my opinion.
Okay, that's
I
where
think
I'm
that
going.
will have a big effect. It is very important to us, though, the input of community groups and the input of the district offices. And the reason is that allows us to understand what effect these properties are having on the community. And because we have to prioritize, when we hear, and I speak to community groups and I speak to your offices, it's not just that you are the council member and you complain, and so it's important to us. It's that gives us some intelligence on, this community is hurting. There's guns being stored. They've seen that. This poor woman has had to live next to these terrible things, which she's seen out of her window. And so that really helps us to understand, well, I got 100 or 1,000 cases I'm dealing with. This one is really affecting people. So I do think that input from your offices and the community groups is vital.
And I asked that question because it always baffles me in terms of process, and delivery of services, because I use sewage and water board and billing for an example. If I've been a billing clerk for 20 years and part of my file is your bill, and your bill's been $100 for 20 years, and then your bill is $9,000, why, it seems like I would be proactive in calling you to say, hey, hold on, something's wrong. How do we deal with it? Shouldn't it be the same thing with code enforcement or some of this blighted or nuisance property? There should be a level of code enforcement and aggression before it goes through the complaint system. Or does the system work like that?
Well, I mean, I do think these are not, the problem of blight cannot be solved single-handedly by code enforcement. As I say, the ultimate solution is there has to be a responsible owner. And we have effective tools under the law available to us. And as long as we have the resources, we can deploy those tools. But the issues are very complicated. I mean, you've spoken about this in the past and the housing stock and the challenges you've seen. And so my focus is really making sure what we can do, our part of the problem, we are being efficient and we have sufficient resources to deploy those tools.
Okay, so I'm really learning how to listen better. I've run my mouth so much for so many years. You said we have the tools necessary as long as we have the resources. So as a legislator, we're constantly looking at what we can throw on the wall and stick, right? Is it just a fine, or do I need to add more fine? Does the charter already say you should not or cannot, or do I add you cannot, should not? So if we already have the tools, what more do we need in terms of enforcement? Do we need to have a larger charter with more laws trying to see what sticks because the other stuff didn't stick? And you said we have what we need in terms of enforcement. We just need the resources. So what's really missing?
So I would say, when I say we have what we need, I'd say we got 90%. So I'm happy to talk about maybe the 10% of what I think is missing from a regulatory perspective, but also how we're addressing it. So I think there are really two pieces, which is that, okay, these are the laws, these are the problems, and is the department properly resourced to deploy the current tools to deal with the problems? And then two, where we have unique problems that are not amenable to resolution under current municipal code, let's say, what do we need? And I'd be happy to speak to that.
And I asked that question because I went out today to actually go inside of a vacant house that's been like that since Katrina. and it's been vacant so long that it's boarded up, then they take the boards down, and it's on 1700 block of Charbonnet Street. And now it's actually like a drug transfer station, right? So it's gone from being a blighted and vacant property to a property that the criminal element is starting to use. And I grew up in that neighborhood, right? So I kind of know the neighborhood a little bit. But when I went down to see it today, it's actually elevated in terms of its nuisance or its negative effect on the community. And we have people there that, you know, we've got some streets paved. They've invested in their homes, but this particular property that's been vacant for 18 years is even another public safety and public blight problem. And it's been on the books for a long time, right? In a community that's kind of coming back. So, and that's why I keep wondering, right? You know, if we have the tools that we need, if we have the laws that we need, and then it matches with the time where we have the resources, is it the delivery of services? Do we need to begin to take a look at our departments and our agencies in terms of how we're trained, how we deliver those services, and how we execute our fund? Do we need to change the mission statement? Do we need to change how we operate? Because I remember a backlog 30 years ago when we weren't complaining about people, and now there's a backlog now. So is there always going to be a backlog?
I wouldn't say there's always going to be a backlog, Councilmember Thomas. I think we're always going to have challenges. Cities change, their dynamic things. I certainly am open to looking at particular ways in which services are delivered. I mean, the example of
There you go. There you go.
Yeah.
Right there. So are we looking at ways in which services are delivered? Is someone come in and say, hey, Oliver, you're delivering these services wrong. If we use our resources and our labor this way, even with a shortage, we could probably be 20, 15% more efficient. Are we doing that?
Absolutely. So just to, use your example of that property on Charbonnet, I think it was, that is now being used, has been long blighted and has now been being used for criminal activity. I mean, one thing we look at something like that in a number of new ways. So one thing we are doing, we have always in the past said, I may have mentioned this, emergency demolition is only justified when the property is falling down. That's not what the law says. And in my judgment, that kind of property where there's criminal activity may be suitable for emergency demolition. And we look at that on a case-by-case basis. I mentioned up there, these active requisitions, equipment operator and laborer. So now this again is about people, but that would be a new delivery of service. That's what I call a strike team that can go into that property, board it up, put up a fence in-house by the city, and then has the bandwidth to monitor it and make sure that if somebody tears the fence down, they put it back up. I was going to mention a little later possible collaboration with the constable's office, which would give us a greater ability to leverage law enforcement in cases like that which implicate crime. So to your point, it's certainly true that those sorts of new ideas can pay value. And I mean, we're committed to looking at anything that might work.
And I was just asking that question because, I go back in my memory bank and I just kind of think about, a lot of stuff that didn't work, but I usually try to highlight on stuff that did. And I remember this CEO, I was talking to some older government officials who had been there. And his name was Kurt Steiner. He was a CAO several years ago. And he was as worried about the delivery of services and how they were delivered versus how much money we had, because he would say, based on the way the system is working and our service delivery is working, the budget could be 10 times bigger and we would still deliver the same capacity because of the way the service was being rendered. So I think at some point, especially given the labor shortages, we have to take a look at delivery of services. We can't keep throwing another law in the book. I mean, that might be fine, but the charter keeps getting fatter. but quality of life and delivery of service keeps getting worse. So maybe at some point, and I know our budget chairman is interested in that. How do we deliver those services what we have? And how do we improve it if it's not working at a maximum level right now? But thank you for what you do. We've gotten a lot in terms of what you've tried to do with your departments. So thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Thomas. Councilmember Morrell?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll pick up from where Councilman Thomas left off. I think one of the challenges we have in the city is that we have a culture of complacency. I mean, there's a reason why for time immemorial, we've been called the Big Easy. And we're not called the Big Easy because it's easy to live here. Any resident would tell you that's because there's this laissez-faire approach to how we do everything, including enforcing the law, especially when it comes to when you're enforcing the, I mean, let me take the criminal law and put it on the side over here for a second. When you talk about enforcing the city's rules and regulations, there has become this kind of idea that's been stressed and perpetuated throughout the years where businesses and people that are bad actors can outlast those individuals in government who try to do lasting change. Basically, if the culture of the city does not change on how we approach certain issues, then fundamentally, let's say Mr. Mulligan example, I've been very impressed with working with you on the job, but you won't be here forever. I won't be here forever. And somebody who is doing something wrong, somebody who's a slumlord rental person, someone who's got a bunch of blighted property across the city, as long as they can delay you or me for a couple of years, they can go right back to what they're doing. So I think fundamentally the challenge we have as a council is how do we put things in place to change that culture? Now, what I will tell you is the blight, redefining blight, I think that's the first time someone's taken a swing at that in years is a first step, because when you take away by clearly working with your office to clearly define what blight is, you take away subjectivity. If you've got somebody in code enforcement who has an inclination to let things slide, when the law is ambiguous, it gives them discretion. When the law is not ambiguous, like, I know that's your friend, but there hasn't been power to that building in 2 years, it's clearly objectively in violation. The other thing which we talk about frequently, I'm getting to a point, I promise, Mr. Chairman, is healthy homes. I know the council last year passed a pretty robust healthy homes ordinance that put a lot of work on your department. And I want to have you kind of give us a briefing. I know I met with you and Ashley with safety and permits, and what we started that was very ambitious. Once you guys analyze what was necessary, it is infinitely more ambitious than we thought, because when we're passing the ordinance from our lay perspective, we're like, oh man, we'll need 3, 4, 5 new people. I think it's important for you to share with the council how many people safety and permits and code enforcement think will be necessary to implement healthy homes.
Yes, of course, Councilman Morrell. The legislation was finalized and we conducted an initial assessment, and we looked at ways we could minimize the manpower necessary, divvy up responsibilities in this case, really delegate some responsibilities from safety and permits and code enforcement, and settled on 39 full-time employees, which of course we recognize is a big ask. But this program is the largest regulatory program within safety and permits. So the estimate is about 75,000 rental units or rental properties, I guess, or excuse me, rental units in the city. But then if we do it by property, which we can do, it still is 40,000, all of which are required under the law to register, all of which required merely for the registration portion, city employees to research taxation, research permits, do a bunch of history. And so that's the assessment which we've made. And then, of course, there are attending costs to all of that. So I can say I think it's an important piece of legislation. I have certainly seen firsthand as code enforcement director, the standards, the bad standards in many of the rental properties in this city. And even just the part of having a registration, having a clear landscape of where these properties are and who they're registered to. But apart, the inspections is important. But again, it goes back to people. So the best intentioned notion, if it isn't resourced with people, won't have the effect that we desire. So I think the right way to proceed, and I know we've spoken about this, is let's work together to identify the biggest priority issues. The priority cases from our perspective, let's have a smaller ask because of course, I understand that as legislation is shaped, it goes through many changes, but the final version doesn't really have a revenue generation mechanism. So I do appreciate the challenge that, for example, puts on finance when looking at a program like this. So and this is what we're doing really this week in safety and permits, is looking at a more circumscribed ask where we can still begin this program's implementation, go after the worst of the worst, and set the foundation for future growth. And so, of course, happy to work with your office on operationalizing that.
Right, and I committed in that meeting that I would work with the budget committee to come up with an initial, probably mid-year ask to help them ramp up the program. But when you talk about the culture in the city, we have a history of substandard, awful rental housing. And what was interesting is that when we had the original healthy home ordinance, many people who opposed it kept saying, well, if code enforcement does their job, you don't need all these other things. But the reason why many of them said that is because code enforcement is understaffed, overworked. And if we were to lay this at code enforcement's feet without additional resources, we're perpetuating that culture of everything being kind of like it's on the books, but we're not really going to do anything with it. What we have in Mr. Mulligan and with Ashley and meeting with them is that we have the opportunity to have a transformational program where you can really have a database of rental properties where you can evaluate them to make sure they're basically habitable. And I mean, my hope sincerely is that after a couple of years, when you've got it under control, you might not need 39, you might need 29, but still, it's going to be a huge task in that ramp up period to go out and evaluate all those properties and to begin that process. But it's still work worth doing, because if we don't do something of this magnitude in regard to rental housing, you're not going to change the culture of landlords and of bad property owners who rent substandard housing, knowing that though Mr. Mulligan will try and enforce it at the best of his ability, he does not have the resources to do it. And then those other parishes we have, like Jefferson and surrounding parishes that are comparable to us, their departments are larger, which is why they're more on top of it, which is why people who want to do bad things and skirt the law get rewarded for their bad behavior. Because while they'll give lip service to the idea of, oh man, if code enforcement just stepped up, they know as a city, we have never properly staffed code enforcement to do its job. So like I told Mr. Mulligan and I told Ms. Becknell, I am happy to work with y'all to get that initial ramp up number, and happy to work with the budget chair to come up with an initial ask and a mid-year request to get in that process, because it is so important we tackle this backlog so people can have housing that is livable, and more importantly, so that those individuals who are offering housing know the city of New Orleans is actually going to make sure you're not renting someone a property that no one should live in. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Morrell.
Thank-
Councilmember Harris.
Yeah, thank you, Tom. Putting aside the Healthy Homes staff up, which I think is critically important for several reasons, including making sure that available homes, we have a database of available units that people can tap into. But putting aside the Healthy Homes, 39 people, 49 people, what is the ideal amount of personnel that you would like to have to effectively run code enforcement? You said you wanted to throw bodies at the backlog. What is that number?
Well, I think the answer is, if you were to ask me what would be the right number, I think it's approximately double what the department has now. However, I don't have, I think it's very hard to make a good estimate like that based on the position we're at now with 33 code enforcement proper employees. So I would much rather bring in 11, let's say, the priority 11 hires, integrate them into the department, ensure that they are efficiently used, that our operations, they're all being put to good use, and then reevaluate. So I would say roughly double, but I don't have high confidence in that. What I have high confidence in is that these 11 are the right 11 and they would have an important effect.
And these are the ones that are in progress.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, great. I know for the strike team, for example, we talked about like mowing lawns and putting up fencing. Is there any way to contract privately with a company, especially a DBE, who might want to help the city board up properties, monitor properties, cut grass?
Yes, absolutely. And as we look at our contracts moving forward, we'll want to include that. So for example, our grass cutting contract, that has to be reprocured. Well, we'll reprocure it this year. It has to be reprocured. It expires, I think, Q2 next year, maybe Q1 next year. And I think we'll put that in the scope of work. You know, we are lucky in code enforcement in that we have good contractors who do a good job. I do think it's always best if we can have, even if it's small, in-house capacity. And I can just tell the guys in the morning, hey, go board this up. That's the quickest, but absolutely we'll be looking at that in contracting moving forward.
Yeah, I know in our Blight drives and Blight walks, there are private citizens who mow lawns in their neighborhoods, who pick up trash in their neighborhoods. You know, just this morning, we got 2 emails asking about the Mow to Own program. And a lot of times they're getting emails about how do I acquire this vacant lot or this lot that somebody's just been sitting on, letting the grass grow. How can we speed that process legislatively? Is there a way to do it? Do you need additional people to help with that?
Well, I think the answer to the latter question is absolutely. So the Mow to Own program, I think it's a great program. I think everyone really likes it. We have relaxed the rules at the end of last year to make more properties eligible. So we had this Mow to Own pilot, I think it was about a year long. We figured out what worked, what didn't. So now, if it hasn't happened already, it's imminent. There are going to be many more properties available, but that whole program is on Latifah Harris, who is our chief lawyer, who is completely indispensable and is involved in everything in code enforcement. And she simply lacks the bandwidth. So if you see there, I've got 2 management development analysts, active requisitions. One of them would be devoted full-time to cost recovery, making sure we're collecting on all the old demolitions, say, we've done. And the other one would probably about half-time do Mow to Own. And so again, great idea. We got to just make sure we can support it in terms of people.
Okay. And again, I don't want to beat a dead horse, but I'm beating a dead horse. When a building is demolished, like hopefully Washington Gardens, that property reverts back to the current owner, who again can just let the grass grow, can let it just be overrun by rodents, whatever, trash. How can we get that back into commerce, into the hand of somebody who might want to build houses on it, or a developer who might want to build responsible apartments?
So I think, again, it's a case by case basis. Now, if somebody demolishes, if we demolish their property, we can hold a cost hearing. We do hold a cost hearing. And then if they don't pay, we put a lien on the property. They don't pay, we sell it at sheriff's sale. And it's not foolproof, because there are occasions where people will buy a home at sheriff's sale that's blighted, pay good money for it, and keep it blighted. And then we fine it more, we foreclose on it again. But that is a very good route, I think, to take. But, you know, somebody who, let's say, pays that cost hearing off, pays the lien off, if the property continues to be in violation of the law, they'll continue to incur fines. Code enforcement's work will not be done. There'll be a Chapter 66 case, grass cutting case, an MPN case opened. And then there are instances where I'll reach out personally to an owner and say, look, you know, this can't be what makes sense for anybody. This is blighted. It's in violation of the law. You're going to just get more and more fines. What can be done, say, in terms of connecting you maybe with a private buyer? Somebody reaches out to us and say they're interested, or in bigger cases, economic development. But as I say, the key is that owner. That's the long-term solution. You get somebody who wants to be there.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. But again, the time to sheriff's sale seems to take years sometimes. So how can we, is there a way, and I'm happy to work with you and the other council members on speeding that process?
Well, I think if you'll let me, I'll get back to you on that, Councilmember Harris, because I do think that the sheriff's sale could be improved. I just haven't had a chance to look at it carefully, but I'd be very happy to work with your office on that.
Yeah, no, I'd like that. And then, we always talk about these smaller properties that are blighting our neighborhoods, but what about the bigger properties like a Plaza Tower? Or Lindy Boggs even. I know that there's responsible owners, at least for Lindy Boggs, but Plaza Tower is sitting there falling apart, scattering debris on people. What are we doing about that?
Well, the problem is bigger, but at the end of the day, it's the same. We need to have an owner there who has a viable development project, who can raise the hundreds of millions of dollars of funding, let's say, to build a mixed use project, whatever the case may be. But again, it's the same sort of thing. And we, that's a case in which I have met with that owner several times about the condition of that property and other properties in his portfolio. We've had active cases on all of them in the past. There's a balance to be struck, because if we have an owner who is trying to raise money, trying to find somebody to develop this thing, and it's just more and more fines, that can be counterproductive to the end of getting this thing back into commerce. At the same time, everyone has to be held to the same account. And if we are going to fine a small, the owner of a small blighted property, we have to do it for the owner of a large blighted property as well. So one thing we've done, now this is me talking as the DCAO, is stand up a development working group. And we've done that for that owner, where it's me, it's economic development, it's Bob Rivers, CPC, historic preservation in the case of Plaza Tower, Jeff Schwartz, economic development, who knows everything about this stuff. And we say, look, we're going to do everything we can within the law to help you get a development done, but you are going to also be expected to make real progress on this. And in the case of Plaza Tower, I think the owner decided that wasn't going to be viable, and he's now looking for a new owner. So we'll support that as best we can. And the hope would be the new owner does something great with that property.
Is there a possibility of, as you assess fines, waiving those fines? So for example, if, we assess all the fines we want, and then ultimately a new purchaser comes in and those fines aren't attached to the property, is there a mechanism for you to waive them so that there's some economic abatement of fines, if you will?
Yes, ma'am, absolutely. So this applies to everybody. We have a lien reduction program, which I'm more than happy to use. Our purpose is not to be punitive in code enforcement. It's not to raise revenue directly. We want to get these blighted properties back into commerce. And when I see, in fact, this happening now on Lyons Street with a case in which there was a very badly blighted property, an out-of-state homeowner we ended up reaching out to directly, and he's done a great job renovating this property, turning it into a nice compliant rental. And, he wants to do a lien reduction. We're more than happy to do that. There are rules that have to be met. There's evidence that has to be presented, but whether it's that little cottage or whether it's a larger property, if it's been fixed and put into compliance with the law, we're more than happy to work within that program.
So we could theoretically continue to assess fines on Plaza Tower, including the cost of securing that property. But ultimately, if that property gets into the hands of a responsible developer, you could abate those fines.
I believe that's so. It gets a little legally complicated, but I think that's right. And we certainly have a lot of tools at our disposal to work in a reasonable way. I mean, in the case of a new owner, absolutely, that person is not responsible for the condition of the property.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think Councilmember Green.
Yes, technically, my machine is signed in as Councilmember King. I didn't know that he was coming back, but I just wanted to take an opportunity to thank code enforcement in behalf of an entire community. Recently, 81 lots and blighted houses were addressed in the 9th Ward off Florida Avenue, something which was long overdue, but something that when I go through the community, for example, at Odell Davis, there was a youth day NOLA, and we had that tremendous cleanup a little while ago, 2 weeks ago. Members of the community notice it and they appreciate it. This is only a good news comment or two that I want to make. I just want to tell you that the tearing down of Blight is something that is making a difference in some of our communities. There's nothing more pleasing, and I've only been here a year, to go to see a property where a blight was removed and now pilings are going in because those owners either sold the property or they decided that they would pay the fine and get a permit and do the development themselves. So to some folks who see, and I understand sometimes the slow progress on blight reduction, it's not slow. There's something being done every week, and we have 5 council districts. I'm pleased that the Department of Code Enforcement has worked with our office well, and you know, we share a lot of information with you. We see a tear down happening once a month, and I know how difficult it is to do it, how it involves city attorneys, how it involves personnel being on place, how it involves moving the debris that you created by the tear down. So I just want to thank you for those 81 lots, and just tell you how the $10 million that's in the budget, I want to speak to the people out there who have blighted properties. Take care of your properties, because at the end of the day, if we tear it down, you know that it's government and it's going to take a little bit more in terms of cost than if you just did it yourself. So take care of your property, but recognize also in certain neighborhoods that we're coming, we see the blighted properties, and it's, I know, and I speak for all of the districts. I'm not even going to say especially District D. There's a new commitment on the part of this city council, I know, but there's an important recognition that's going on that we are going to address those blighted properties. The hotel that was for so long on the I-10 service road that remained a blight. I just want to say that I'm pleased with those 81 tear downs and lot cuttings, and let's just continue that good work, and I look forward to working with you.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Councilmember King. Councilmember Moreno.
Thank you. Mr. Mulligan, I actually very much appreciate the work that you're doing and your tenacity around this. And I wholeheartedly agree with you that it's about, you know, holding the owners accountable at the end of the day. And to Councilmember Harris's point about how long it often takes, you know, even if we go through the adjudication and the sheriff's sale and all the different opportunities that then occur, you know, for it to just kind of linger. I think you're probably the first in many, many years to even look at using the criminal statute on blight. And to tell you the truth, for some of these offenders who are really just horrible offenders and just kind of string us along and hurt our neighborhoods, I actually recommend that we use this so much more, that we use this in parallel with different initiatives that you can push forward through your office. Because look, maybe they don't care about the court fines and fees on the civil side. Maybe they don't care about that. You know, they've got a bunch of lawyers and they can all get lawyered up and they don't really care. Some of them might not even be from around here. So they really then don't care. But when you threaten someone with having a criminal penalty put on them, that's a whole different story. That may actually bring them to the table to fix things at a much faster pace. So I would actually encourage you, for those really horrendous actors, to be more aggressive with utilizing the state criminal penalty. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. I completely agree. And I think your point to a criminal charge just sticking a little different is absolutely correct. And so that's the intention here. Another thing to keep in mind is that when we use a tool, whether it's we tear down a building that's been blighted for a long time, we levy a criminal charge, it doesn't just affect that bad landlord or that bad owner, but everybody else who is similar sees this might be coming down the pike. It might be happening to my building. You know, the constable could be showing up on my doorstep, and that's very important. So it isn't just that one particular person who we can compel or hope to compel compliance with. The effect is much broader.
All right, Mr. Mulligan, you're almost done. I have some questions related to what my colleagues were asking. So council members Thomas and Morrell talked about delivery of services, and I think you handled it delicately, but maybe let me be more of a blunt instrument with it. Your money and your spending is really spread out. If your employees are split between HUD funding and other funding, and they can only spend X amount of time on city business because HUD mandates A, B, and C, that seems to prevent barriers to doing the work that you've been talking so much about trying to do. I mean, am I right about that?
Well, I think in theory it does. The HUD map is not completely different from, let's say, the blight map of New Orleans. So they're looking at neighborhoods. And this is a decision well, the interpretation comes from the Office of Community Development. They manage the grants, and I'm happy for them to do that. And I think it is appropriate that they make these judgments. And the map is similar to where Blight is. So I don't think it's an enormous problem from an operational perspective, but it is a constraint. And it is also, I mean, it's also the administrative constraint. Are people filling out the proper paperwork? We got to make sure we get compliance right. Supervisors have to spend their time tracking, where is this person going, where's that person going? So that maybe is more of an impact than the mere constraint placed on, say, an individual inspector.
If, and I may be putting the cart before the horse and wishing for this, but if code enforcement becomes its own department, would that constraint be made more easy over time? In other words, would you be able to divide people into, you're focused on HUD, you're focused on city business, you're focused on other things? Because I just want to make sure that we're maximizing both people's time and the personnel that you have allocated.
Yes, sir. I believe it would. Anything that can be done, this is my general philosophy, and as I mentioned earlier, I have seen this borne out, is that whenever we can simplify the administration of an entity, of a department, make the funding sources clearer, understanding what's attached to each one, what our individual personnel can do, helps. I mean, I'll mention the enormous effort that went into spending general fund money for the first time. A very simple thing, you would think, but it required a lot of moving parts within code enforcement and in other city departments to give us the ability to, say, receive checks for the first time and cash them, use BRASS, the invoicing system, to make sure these general fund related invoices are processed. We have an office worker, Michelle Woods, who's done just a great job in setting up these processes, coordinating with people, getting trained, standing up the new procedures. And, you know, it's nobody's fault. It's just things were done a certain way in the past, maybe for a good reason, but there is a new reality. We have to make our operations efficient. We have to make our administration simple. And so anything that's going to serve that end of simplicity and transparency is very important.
To that end of trying to put more money into code enforcement, and obviously not rooting per se for people to be subject to fines and fees, but your presentation has collected $2.5 million in revenue. That money goes back to the general fund, or does it go to code enforcement?
Well, that money goes, the short answer, it goes to this fund 7613, which is code enforcement. I'll qualify that a little bit. There is a piece related to the cost recovery hearings, which we're working on trying to figure out now exactly where that goes. But you know, in the past, that money has been used for a variety of purposes. And I don't have any particular beef with that. Those are just decisions that need to be made at an appropriate level. So I think really, you know, this money we bring in through fines and fees, it goes in this fund 7613, which is at least nominally a code enforcement fund. And then I think it's appropriate for the CAO or for the finance director to make judgments about how it should be spent. The way I see my job is to identify our operational needs, the funding it will take to fulfill them, and then whatever funding is granted to execute as best I can.
Okay. And then Councilmember Thomas, I think, was sort of making this point, and it's one that I also want to make on a macro level with many of the presentations, is you can tell people this is what's been done, but if they can't see it or they don't know about it, it makes it hard. I know there is a blight map. I guess A, is that public, and then B, are there other dashboard tools that code enforcement and innovation are working on so the public can look and see, hey, there's been 20 blighted properties in this neighborhood that have been demolished in the last year and a half, something like that?
Yes, there is. So there is a general map, which the Office of Performance and Accountability has been very helpful in setting up. I believe it's active right now. And if I could just maybe go ahead a couple slides and talk about our blight reduction project. As I understand, the CAO's office is standing up a dashboard so that the public can see in real time the way we are executing this project. And I'll just mention that this is our one-time fund, $10 million for blight abatement. We've invoiced this year 72,000, but as of middle of last week, we had over $400,000 of work actually done.
Okay.
So now we're at about $500,000 of work done that's going to be invoiced by the contractor across districts. And we're rolling on this project, and we are committed to getting this work done. We're prioritizing properties and letting the public know, not just through dashboards, but through communications with your offices. We're careful to let everybody know when we conduct a demolition, so that they know that this is money well spent. And I also would be remiss if I didn't mention, maybe I mentioned this earlier, our great contractor, Dur Heavy Construction, which does a good job. They're careful and they are excellent with invoicing us. So we're able to ensure that the work is done. It's compliant with the rules, which we require. And we're rolling on this blight abatement project. Maybe if I just say a word about title research.
Go ahead, because I have a follow-up on blight abatement. Go ahead.
So title research, this is the backlog, which we've discussed. We did an RFP looking for a private firm. We got one response, which was not DBE compliant. So that happened last month. So we've just rewritten the scope of work to make it broader. We're going to be going back out to industry. And we're also going to be contacting firms directly, just making double sure that everybody knows this thing's coming down the pike. And then that 2.5 million, we're going to just spend it as soon as possible. There's no need to parcel this out. We just want to get through this backlog and then get those cases ready for hearing.
Okay, and just a point I feel like I need to make here at the beginning is the money that is one time is spent over 3 years. So if you're seeing the $10 million, you're anticipating roughly to spend about 3.3 or 4 this year, not all 10 million. Is that right?
Well, that's our nominal timeline. So as I say, we're at about $500,000 now. So we're really just ramping up though. So that would put us at, if we don't ramp up, 6 million in 3 years, but I think we'll be able to get through it much more quickly than that.
I was wondering how long it take Mr. Montana.
I was
Stop
trying to
there.
stay quiet, but just to qualify something else that you'll probably see laced through all the presentations in the quarterly budgets for the one-time amount of funding is that, remember, for this amount of 3-year spend, the first quarter unapologetically is really wrapped up in a lot of development of CEAs, a lot of processes, a lot of procurements. So unfortunately, through the first quarter, and we anticipated this, as we gear up all our CEAs and everything that needs to go into the execution of these one-time dollars, you will see smaller numbers over the course of the first quarter. I think later in the Parks Department, you'll see an exception, which I'll brag about when he's up here, a little bit faster spend with Parks and Parkways. However, over the course of the rest of the agencies, you're going to see a little bit smaller numbers. I hope as we go through this through quarter 2, especially quarter 3, quarter 4 and beyond, you're going to really see that number start jettisoning.
Yeah, I mean, that's what we're all interested in, is seeing, I think, both sides of the coin, the money spent and the results at the same time. And I think, Tom, you're right. It's requires both communication directly with neighborhoods and with having something publicly facing so people can see what's going on. All right, I don't see any other questions. Anybody have anything else? Okay, thank you for your presentation.
Thank you, sir.
We appreciate it. All right, next.
We have online comments.
Oh, go ahead. Oh, wait, and Mr. Burnside too, who seems to have stepped out for a second.
So the first online comment comes from Alfred Sunsari, representing P&J Oyster Company Incorporated. The business at 540 North Rampart Street blocks my driveways, violates the noise ordinance daily, does not sweep the sidewalk and street adjacent to the business, and has begun to serve food on the sidewalk adjacent to my property. I would appreciate if the city would cite and enforce the ordinances being violated by the business owner at Page Bar. The next comment comes from Deshae Greeley, representing NOE Matters Coalition Community Task Force. The comment reads, there needs to be a revamp of code enforcement procedures similar to a 3 strikes you're out process with property owners who do not comply. The city of Alabama State House passed HB 430, which would be a good point of reference. Thank you. The next comment comes from Eric Greeley. I would agree to any of the code enforcement changes of clarification as long as the property owners of Blight no longer continue to be fined continuously for years, promoting no results for community resolution that has their property value impacted by the blight. There needs to be an enforcement of sale or development within the code enforcement procedures. That completes the comments.
Thank you, Mr. Shy. Mr. Burnside, you want to make your comment?
Old man bladders only last so long. That's my first comment. Michael Eric Burnside, 2215 Felicity, comments. I've been 7 years in the city. I've interacted with the code enforcement for a long time. There's all kinds of ways to step sideways. I've been in code enforcement hearings because I've called, I'm the complainant, really. So plans, there are people who present plans, and the mere existence of plans is sufficient to derail everything in the past. I don't know if that's true or not now. And those plans in the past were never implemented. For instance, the property at 2300 MLK has plans. If you go in One Stop app and you look, they're plans. They were never actually paid for, but they're there. And, for previous events, not talking about Mr. Mulligan now, they were sufficient in and of themselves to stop all kinds of things. Just having plans on file somehow is magic. New owners, I talk to a lot of people, some of which are not necessarily fully ethical people because I live in a bad neighborhood. It seems that there are plots, shall we call them, where I'll sell you mine, you sell me yours. And being new owners, we just wipe everything away. So these things also happen in the real world. Also, the federal government, as somebody mentioned, the HUD map and the Blight map have an amazing overlap. So one of my houses is now in the hands of HUD. And of course, sometimes they don't even bother talking or calling back to our fine director here. So lots of problems out there. It sounds nice about the criminal blight because it's about the owner, not the property. The demos come out to 822 demos, which sounds like a lot of demos, even over, say, 3 years. But way back when I was young, there was an employee of code enforcement who took me into an office, gave me an hour-long show, and he said to me, and I have no reason to disbelieve him, that at that time there were 10,000 demo permits that were not actually being demoed. Now, most of these were owner-owned, but again, one way that you defer the city from demoing your property is you say that you're going to demo it yourself, and then, of course, don't bother. That's a red light. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Tom, can I ask you just one more question related to this? When Safety and Permits was here related to STRs, they told us about their lack of hearing officers, that they only had 2 for zoning, STRs, HDLC, and VCC. Is code enforcement having a similar issue?
Well, we're not having a similar issue when it comes to hearing officers in particular. I mean, our backlog is the title research. One thing I will say now with my DCAO hat on, I do think we can find real efficiencies by centralizing hearings. So right now we may have multiple contracts across departments for hearing officers. HDLC does hearings, VCC does hearings, Safety and Permits does hearings, code enforcement does hearings. And one of my initiatives right now is creating a new central adjudication bureau to essentially allow our people to present multiple types of cases, simplify the procurement of hearing officers, and just get throughput up. So that is one initiative, and I think that's the room for improvement there.
Would the idea then be, instead of having this fight about how much per hour for hearing officers, to actually have the hearing officers in-house instead?
Well, the hearing officers would still be contractors, but I certainly, your point about we shouldn't have different city departments, say, offering different amounts for hearing officers for basically the same job. So that's one reason why I think it makes sense.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thanks, sir.
Appreciate it. Thank you. All right, next up, Park and Parkways. They have party.
No, property management. You got Sally Shushin? Yeah. I took you guys off. But they're gonna. Okay. Oh, I know.
All right, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Councilmember Giarrusso.
Good afternoon. Floor is
Council members.
yours.
Michael Karam on behalf of the Department of Parks and Parkways. I'm here with Joe Threat. Deputy CEO of Infrastructure. And before I get started with my presentation, Mr. Threat, if you'd like to say a few words.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. Councilmember Jeruso, council members just for Mike, Karam starts with his brief. I just want to say that, with my mandate of continuous improvement for my directors working within the city, providing good and services. Mike, him and his hardworking folks at Parks and Parkways, highly motivated, a self-starter. He's really passionate about his job and what he does to provide services to the city. I know Mike has been through since he took over in 2020.
End of
Mike?
2020.
2020, he's responded, one of the main respondents operationally, hurricanes, tornadoes, debris, Mardi Gras cleanup. He's always out there, always available. He is actually 365, 24 hours a day. Whenever I want to reach out for him, he's available and can make things happen. So with that, I just want to publicly say thanks a lot, Mike, for your dedication. And with that, you can start your briefing.
Appreciate that, Joe. So I'm here today to present our Q1 budget snapshot on behalf of the Department of Parks and Parkways and our over 130 dedicated men and women. Our department prides ourselves in being responsive with our forestry and grounds maintenance teams, restorative with our tree planting efforts, both in-house and with our planting partners, and also our park improvements that we have started this year with a significant pot of bond funding. Also, our partnerships across the board with our infrastructure team, NORD, Safety and Permits, our park partners at City Park and Audubon and others, also the Sewage and Water Board when it comes to infrastructure issues and grass maintenance issues. And also, of course, our historic properties, both big and small across the city, Joseph Bartholomew Golf Course, and our historic parks and the various festivals and programs that we host. Our current budget snapshot for 2023 has seen a significant increase in funding due to our one-time fund balance, but we currently have a budget of over $16 million. And as you can see in the year-to-date spent, we're at just over $320,000. But just to make a note that we've encumbered over 5.1 million of that $7.1 million. So we as a department are right on track with our budget per previous years, even with the additional funding, which we'll talk about at the end of the presentation from our fund balance. Just some of the highlights from the department so far this year, working with our forestry team and working to reduce the backlog. Also, right-sizing our grounds maintenance operations to where we're in a position where we can have a cyclical cut across the board citywide on par with our contractor in the coming years, to where we don't have complaints from forestry or grounds maintenance when it comes to our responsiveness as a department. But also, as I've mentioned with Council Member Thomas in the past, to be in a position to where if it's not city-owned property that the city is responsible for, that we can have an answer, whether it's from Sewage and Water Board or the Lakefront Management Authority or any of our other entities when it comes to a maintenance issue. And so that speaks again to our partnerships and our communication across the board with various entities and just being familiar with their maintenance operations as well. Also, our planting operations this year, we're just wrapping up a over $1.1 million citywide tree planting effort through bond funds, in which we planted over 1,100 specimen trees, mostly on neutral grounds across the city in each council district. And also our planning work with economic development at Armstrong Park with Councilmember King and Brechtel, and our citywide reforestation efforts with our park partners, and of course the citywide Parks and Recreation Master Plan that we're currently working on with those park partners. And one more note, our partnerships continue with a CEA that the mayor recently signed with Thrive and Delgado for shared use of our greenhouse, so that we can focus on workforce development and work towards a maintenance program of green infrastructure across the board that does not involve single contractors or in-house work, but taps into the vast resources of our smaller contractors as they come up through these various programs for workforce development. And just to speak quickly of personnel, and if anytime there's a question about our vacancies, please feel free to stop me. We currently have, let's see, 135 actual FTE positions. And with that, we have 29 vacancies. And so the 29 vacancies are on par really for the last few years as we have come out of the pandemic. A variety of issues that have come up over the last few years that we're working to resolve, in part through help from the administration and you all. With the living wage increase, we've seen a larger number of applicants come through the door. But we as a department continue to deal with similar issues that we've dealt with in years past that deal with or that come from a revolving door where for every employee that we hire, there seems to be employees that their terminations on par. I think this year we're at 6 new hires and 5 terminations. Although just a quick note, and there's one area of a bright spot when it comes to these vacancies of 29. As of today, we're actually down to 26 as 3 new employees started today. And we have 6 potential employees, applicants that are going through pre-employment screening. So if all goes well, within a week, we'll be down from 29 to 20 as a department. So that's my presentation when it comes to our vacancies and our current operations at the end of Q1. Before I go into our one-time funds, if you all have any questions, I'm happy to entertain them now, or I can conclude the presentation and we can answer questions at the end.
Yeah, Councilmember Harris has our button pressed, but she said she's happy to go then. Councilmember Thomas, do you want to go now or at the end? Okay, keep on going.
Keep going.
Yeah.
And so our one-time funds, which are fund balance monies, as Mr. Montano mentioned, we have $3.4 million that's been allocated to address our tree trimming and removal backlog. Our current backlog sits at roughly 1.5 years. So if you call in for a request to trim a city tree, whether it's in a park, a playground, or a neutral ground, it tends to be on the right of way, right? The area in front of your house between the sidewalk and the curb. There's a backlog. And we were hoping through an influx of additional millage funding pre-pandemic to be in a better position than we are. However, with the one-time allocation, we hope to be back to that position within 3 years. So $3.4 million over 3 years with a contractor that we already have in place, as Mr. Montano mentioned, allows us to be in a position to where we can hit the ground running. Year to date, we've spent about $165,000, but we've issued work orders in the amount of over $614,000 of that $3.4 million. So as a percentage, we are on pace to burn through those $3.4 million in over 2 years, which would be ahead of schedule. And again, our hope, based on the numbers that we run, is that if we are in a position at the end of this one-time allocation to where we as a department can be responsive to a 311 request and complete that request within 3 months, then we as a city, we're doing pretty good. And so we'll continue to work with that contractor and to send work orders the contractor's way, and continue to work in-house to build our team through recently seeing improvements in hiring, but also in our heavy equipment through bond funds. And our hope is by the end of this year and going into next year and subsequent years, we'll be in a better position.
Yeah, and Councilmember Jerusalem, if I could, Mike brought up an issue that I was going to bring up in Public Works meeting, but you know, we are scrubbing the 311 database as far as it is for maintenance. Naturally, you can imagine how many duplications we have in the systems. So I've got somebody full time to firstly pull out all the duplications, and after that, we'll actually send some of our staff out to do field validations and verifications to make sure those priorities are good. And then at that point, I think we'll realistically be able to, when someone comes to the council office or calls my office, we can go down and say, you're number 159, and we estimate within 6 months, we're going to take care of this. So we're drilling through that right now, but we need, across all the infrastructure departments, we need to have clean data in 311.
Joe, can I ask you a question about that? Let me start off by saying I appreciate the candor about it. It just seems like 311 is supposed to be a centralized system, but it's decentralized at the same time. So is it going to be each department has to now have ownership of 311 and go through? I just want to make sure we know how it's working, because it in theory is a really good repository of the information and a way for
Absolutely.
administration to know. But I think sort of the point Councilmember Thomas made earlier, it's only as good as the delivery. Of the
Right, exactly. And I think as far as over infrastructure, I've got the major part of that 311 system. We've got Tom that was here early, his department. He's got the code enforcement, you know, and other departments, but I'm gonna be the single point of connect. I'll be the point of contact for that, because I'm gonna work with the other directors to make sure that we clean information, and then we work with the other departments to make sure that we validate those issues. As you know, when I was listening to Gassan earlier, when a resident sees a service cut, they think City of New Orleans. So we get the calls initially. We have to backtrack with Gassan to see if the work has been done or not. But I'm also work with Sewer and Water Board to make sure that we're together, all together, as a city, to clean that and make sure that everybody has a valid work order in the system.
And just to add to that, in terms of Parkway's responsiveness to 311 and the 311 system that currently exists, you know, we work very hard, my team, in making sure that 311 cases that stay open for an extended period of time are receiving the attention that they need, so that we can address them and close them in the proper way. As you all know, the 311 requests that we get in come in for a variety of reasons, whether it's tree trimming requests or removals to overgrown grass, which that tends to be rare these days, but then a variety of issues that come up in public space. And so sometimes it's a bit taxing in terms of the amount of issues that pop up in the neutral grounds, but we work with both internally and well with other departments to try and address those issues so that the case can be closed and the issue can be resolved. It's unfortunate in many ways that we as a department are as responsive in partnership with sanitation in clearing illegal dumping on the neutral ground, because oftentimes it encourages people that if they're this quick in responding, that we can just continue to do the action. So on the enforcement side, that's something for our other partners. But in terms of the work that we do as a department, in which the vast majority of the public doesn't see because the issue goes away, I'm very proud of that, although it is a double-edged sword when it comes to our responsiveness.
Thank you. All right, Councilmember Harris and Councilmember Thomas.
Michael, thank you for your work. I want to start with Mardi Gras, and I know you all are responsible for clearing the neutral ground before parades. I know you asked me to go on a ride along and I was unable to. What can we as city council do to make your job easier, especially during the Mardi Gras season where people are now parking days ahead? I mean, my idea is really a cow catcher on a streetcar, but I don't think that's really feasible. What can we do to help you?
So we addressed that recently in the Mardi Gras After Action, and I was very clear in my presentation to the group that the first thing before council needs to get involved, if at all, in addressing some of the ordinances, is establishing a task force, as was done previously in, I think, 2018, 2019. I think you all, in addition to some changes to the code, added a time period to that pendency, right? To where in previous code language didn't address the time period. Now there's a 4-hour window. As we saw this year, the popularity of camping out on the neutral ground and the challenges that a department that is responsible for tree trimming, grounds maintenance, and park maintenance has with enforcing municipal code, coupled with the fact that historically, we as a department have have had dozens of our staff members work with sanitation into the late hours of the night, and they're expected to come in at 7 a.m. the next day to do work. Add to that this year, we've seen larger than ever numbers of our staff working with NOPD on barricade duty. So we have, I think, over close to 60 staff members this year working with sanitation and NOPD on overtime Mardi Gras work. Incredible work they do. Obviously, they are one of the puzzle pieces that make Mardi Gras function. I'll get to your question about what council can do. Although we haven't quite looked at the code language specifically, but I have some ideas. First of all, it's identifying our staff members that can work to enforce those pre-parade ordinances. Those that are either not working during Mardi Gras and overtime work, and those that have been properly trained to engage the public when it comes to keeping the neutral grounds clear. It's not only an issue pre-parade, but then it also becomes an issue during the parade whenever you have a whole list of items that are prohibited for public health and public fairness reasons. And we're just at the point where we're working towards the pre-parade work. The code language is pretty clear. The public always seems to be very creative when it comes to ways to keep you all on your toes, and us when it comes to challenging those ordinances. And so there's nothing in the code to speak to tarps as cordoning off public space and making it private. But we've seen that now we have larger and larger tarps. There's no language in the code to refer to the specifications of ladders, and we've seen those adult ladders that came up this year. We worked really well with safety and permits this year in identifying, well, it's either a ladder or it's a platform. If it's a platform, we have the ability to remove it. Once we meet as a task force and identify if there is a need for changes to the ordinances, then we'll approach you all. Of course, as I mentioned to you during Mardi Gras, we're happy to take input whenever based on your observations and your collective feedback. But the biggest challenge for us is working at a system which, to an extent, has been utilized in the past, where, we're the fun police, and we're the ones who are keeping the neutral ground clear up to, roughly 1 p.m., 2 p.m. during the weekday. So it's a job that Parks and Parkways staff does because we are obligated by the code to do it. And I think ultimately, if we find a right balance between coordination with public safety officers and other departments, we can make it work.
Yeah, Michael, I mean, we literally were driving behind you all while you were trying to clear the neutral ground and saw, folks speak to people on the neutral ground, and then immediately after you left, they just moved their tarps right back and they're fighting with each other, whatever. So is there a need to look into deputizing Parks and Parkways workers so that they can actually hand out citations in those instances? Is it a matter of, again, working better with law enforcement? I mean, I don't want you to be the fun police, but people have to get to work.
Right. So I think the only portion of the code language that references a fine is with regard to portable toilets, which is something that is a public health issue, and we've seen more and more of those portable camping toilets. Before we get to the point of deputization, when it comes to Mardi Gras enforcement, I feel that working out a system to where we have, similar to neutral ground parking, it's just constant monitoring of the space during the set time period and just keeping it clear from the beginning. I know that in years past, Parkway staff has gone out at the crack of dawn. We as a department are willing to out whenever we need to start, 5, 6 a.m. It's just a matter of working with the staff to identify the staff and the proper way to engage the public, because although it is a festive occasion and carnival in general, we don't want to put ourselves in a position to where it's contentious.
Yeah, and I think Councilmember Harris, that I went out 2 or 3 nights with the crews with sanitation, and something that would be really helpful is that if the Mardi Gras goers would at night, right after the parades, move their stuff, because it's hard for the crews to come down with tarps and ladders and couches sitting out on the neutral ground, and you know, the staff is supposed to be able to clean and provide a service for the next day. I mean, even the streetcar line rolling down the street, if they could move it that night and then, you know, possibly get their stuff back out the next day, that would help tremendously.
I appreciate that. And again, I'm not ruling out the cow catchers. I do want to turn to, that's a Midwest joke. I'm from Ohio originally. It's a thing where you put, anyway, I'll talk to you about it later. Turning to tree planting, I know that we requested that y'all take a look at MLK to add additional trees to the work that's going on over there as far as construction. Have you been involved at all with getting additional trees on MLK where they're putting in the bike lanes?
I can't speak to that. I have not been involved personally in that project. I think I'd have to get back to you on that after I speak with Public Works, because I know that what they're doing is adding a number of green infrastructure components to that.
Okay.
And it may not be trees on the neutral ground as much as it is in the right of way.
Okay.
So happy to speak with you about that.
Okay, great. On staying on the issue of trees, are you geared up or gearing up for hurricane season as far as prioritizing tree cutting, branch cutting, identifying hazardous branches, trees?
So our preparation for hurricane season is really just ensuring that our heavy equipment and our forestry staff are ready to be responsive. Much of the work that we've done since Ida and other storms is in coordination with other departments and the emergency contractors, just removing any remaining potentially hazardous hangers, especially the larger ones. And those over time work themselves out usually through our forestry team and then through a one call. So we feel confident that we're in a position going into June 1 to be ready.
Yeah, and I think Councilmember Harris, right now our folks are meeting on emergency contracts. So we're making sure that all our contracts we need for this hurricane season are in place as far as staff augmentation. Also, we're making sure that we've had some major changes in leadership at EMD to make sure all our equipment orders are in and we have enough equipment to move into the season this year.
Good to hear. I do want to turn to budget, specifically the $400,000 that we requested to be allocated to your office to address the concrete parking lot at the Keller Center. Has any progress been made on that?
So working with your staff in identifying the location behind the Keller Center where the concrete removal will take place, the funding for that will be a combination of the citywide green space enhancement funds, which we have approximately $3 million remaining after our tree planting initiative has been complete. And now our landscape and design team is turning to implementing that project. We've had the specs together for a while, but the priority of the tree planting project took precedent. And so moving from that, we're looking at a few other projects, and we're looking to incorporate the Keller Center project into that. What I think is going to happen is that we'll have additional funding left over from other projects, from other bond funded projects. We'll also have some general fund budget for that. And so it's going to be a matter of combining the funding from our general fund and the bond funds to make the project happen. I think what we've done with the remaining $3 million project is we've combined it to where we're doing everything to be put out for one bid in order to get a better price. And so that's the hope, is that we can include that in addition to one other green space creation project, to where those two projects will be our two projects where we're focusing on green space creation.
Okay, yeah, because I know we've identified not only the Keller Center, but other pocket park possibilities, especially in Gerttown, on LaSalle as well. So I'll get an update from you after this meeting on where those are. But I do want you to talk about the park master plan and what y'all are doing with that.
Sure. So the consultant is midway through the citywide park and recreation master plan planning. They just concluded presentations across council districts. I believe it was in 4 locations over the 5 council districts. And we will circle back in May for a second round of public engagement. I know there's a survey available to the public that we have put out both on our social media, and I know the consultant has reached out to each of you as council members to encourage your participation and to spread the word about the survey. At this point, feedback from the public is key, and getting the public to fill out that survey. The Big Green Easy is the name of the citywide park and recreation master plan, and getting feedback from the public both at those meetings and then also through the online survey. And I believe they're looking to wrap up the planning and present their recommendations later in the summer.
Great, thank you. And we'll be sure to circulate that survey on social media.
Thank you, Councilmember Harris. Councilmember Thomas.
Let's stick with trees for a minute. A lot of what happens with trees, especially given where we are with weather, and especially now that we know that squirrels and birds are rendering whole neighborhoods without electricity and blackouts. What about emergency trimming? Is there a category for emergency trimming versus just ordinary trimming?
So if there's a 301 request, right?
Okay.
Every time there's a 301 request, our arborist and forestry team go out and inspect that site, and they make a determination whether or not it's a routine trimming or removal, or it's elevated to an emergency request. If it is elevated to that status, then the issue is being addressed within a matter of days or weeks rather than months.
Is there any thought given, because especially with the discussion about insurance right now and storm resistant roofing, we know a lot of that has to relate to when tree limbs actually cause damage to roofs. So are we assessing it that way, or taking that type of look or approach to especially trees or limbs that may cause some problem that are not only affecting us because of the weather event, but also based on what the industry is saying, we don't have storm resistant roofs, or roofs are becoming more damaged because of trees and other stuff that are in the way. Have we taken any kind of look at it like that, given the discussion we have now? In terms of trimming, see, well, we know that we have a 311, we've done a neighborhood assessment. These public trees, or these private trees, or especially the public ones, actually potentially could cause damage to property.
If there's an issue with a city right-of-way tree in terms of potentially damaging a home, that resident is encouraged to call 311. Our arborists are trimming trees according to standard arboricultural practices. Also, we have a free permit that the resident, if they so choose to sort of skip the line and have the work done by a licensed arborist, has the ability to contact our department and get that permit, so that we can ensure that there is a licensed arborist doing the work and doing it to the standards that we adhere to. So whenever there is an issue of a potentially dangerous limb, or a limb that's hanging over a roof line, the 311 system that's in place and our response to that system is effective at, in my experience, at addressing the issue.
And I should have said earlier, first of all, thank you guys and your team for being responsive. I mean, after Mr. Threat's opening, we probably should have told you thank you and let you get back to work because he was right in his assessment of what your team does. Mr. Threat, you said something that I was writing it down to ask for. I'm on like delivery of services and how we operate right now. And I was recalling in the 1990s, Mayor Goldsmith was a famous conservative mayor in Indianapolis who was on this quest to privatize everything, right? He thought that municipal government couldn't work and private industry did everything better. And then once he became mayor, he saw in many cases that when we privatized or gave out contracts, there were actually public employees and agencies who actually did it better when they were resourced and trained and organized. You mentioned setting up some stopgaps so that if contractors don't do stuff, we'll have some strike teams. Are we actually taking an overall look at government? Is you know, especially with some of the extra funds we have, to train some strike teams within government that, you know, and even though we may have a contractor, but that the contracts could be written so that if we have to send out our strike team, then we're reimbursed from that contract. So if the trash doesn't pick up, do we have a trash crew ready to say, oh, well, guess what? Guess where that money comes from? The contract. If we have a street trimming crew that if you haven't finished trimming the tree, if you haven't, I mean, the sidewalk or the curbs, we have a crew that's prepared to go out and guess where that money comes from? That money comes from, I think you touched on it. I think it's an opportunity there now, though, especially given, I'll say it, collusion in the contractor and construction market. And in many cases that we're getting a different product here in New Orleans that they're giving other places, even with the money that we have.
We've talked about it, you know, since I've got here. I've talked to Sarah Porteous about it and some of my other supervisors in Department of Public Works. As you see what we went through with sanitation, it's the point. I mean, I have some employees that told me that we used to have our own concrete plant, asphalt
You know
plant,
where I'm going.
sanitation trucks and everything else. And some of the cities I've read that they have actually went from contractor back to city-owned operations to make it. It's a balancing act. And I think, you know, we need to really take a strong look at that because it's a price of doing business. When you put a contract out, it's the overhead costs on that.
Well, I just think it's two of the great lies in our country right now. And the number one being fast food. No such thing as fast food. You order and you wait, no matter where you go. And the fact that privatization of many municipal agencies, we're going to save us money and be more efficient. Neither fast food doesn't happen, and with the government savings has not happened with many privatized government agencies. So where are we in looking at that? And the other thing is, I think we could do a couple other things. We could work with Delgado, Sidney Collier, and other institutions for ex-offenders, and train some of these kids right now who don't have any skills, let alone skilled labor, especially because we know one thing. Given the data center report, the Hispanic community who's relied heavily on skilled labor post-Katrina, they have doubled African-American per capita family income on skilled labor, not math and tech, not just the sciences, but on taking advantage of the gap in the opening in skilled labor in our economy. So I actually believe it's a real opportunity if we can really take a real in-depth look at it, had to invest in some crews and some partnerships here so that if the contractor is not doing your job, then those strike crews go out, we subtract it from your contract, and we get the job finished quicker than what they're doing it right now.
I think operationally it's worth, you know, putting some money to some type of feasibility study to say whether some of our operations are done by city employees or contracted out. Because as you know, some of the contracts we put out, no matter what enforcement language we get put into it, the quality of work that we get for our money is not always perfect.
Well, look at the trim work. Look at the trim work right now. I mean, you don't have to be Einstein to go, you know, I did some cement finishing work growing up with my uncles, you know, and I didn't have to have all my education and college degrees to go finish the sidewalk or finish the driveway. And we have many projects right now where they went back and they did the street and they overlaid the surface of the street, but the curbs and the sidewalks, even in my neighborhood, there's mounds of dirt and mounds of trash.
Well, I encourage in this
Two
public.
people in a bag of cement.
Right, and I encourage anyone that's listening today, if you're a concrete finisher or you can do curved sidewalk, there's plenty of work out there right now. All you have to do is walk up to the construction site. Because most of our work crews right now are capacity and we need all the help we can get.
But also we can take a look at what we just talked about, is that maybe have a partnership with organizations like the First 72 and Delgado and some of these technical training schools to say, we have a strike force that, and when folks say, where's the money going to come from? Money's going to come from the contractor.
If I could speak.
Money's gonna come from their contract.
Just to focus on permeable surfaces and green space work that is being done in that field. In terms of partnerships with Delgado, we or the mayor recently signed the CEA where Delgado and Thrive are partnering with Parks and Parkways for use of our greenhouse in order to focus on workforce development, so that organizations like Thrive, Job One, Louisiana Green Corps are able to train up returning individuals, anyone that's looking for job skills in green space work, so that whether they're working ultimately for Parks and Parkways, for larger contractors, or starting their own businesses. And we've also, as a department, found that the jury's out as to whether or not privatization or focused on public workforces are ideal. But as a department, Parkways, both in our grounds maintenance work and our forestry work, pretty much do a split. Close to half of our green spaces are maintained in-house and the other half by our contractor. And now with this allocation from the fund balance, we have a large portion of our forestry work being done by a contractor and a similar amount being done in-house.
Well, you just mentioned the magical word in terms of workforce development. That's being intentional about developing our workforce, and what Ms. Villavaso does with that workforce development over there. Just think if we took where we fell short or where contractors fell short and we invested more there, it could actually pay for itself. Because how much more does it cost us to have a project that's supposed to be done in a year and a half, and then it takes 3 years? So just something to think about. And I see you're thinking about it already.
Yeah, thank you, Councilmember Thomas. Before I get to Councilmember Green, I just think it's a good preview because I'm going to ask that question about sanitation when we have public works. I mean, I'm worried about what happens when the supplemental service wrapped around one of the providers goes away. And how do we take Councilmember? Oh, it is Councilmember King. All right, well, I wasn't sure. Want to make sure. Councilmember King.
Thank you. Mr. Karam threat. First of all, thank y'all for all the work that you do in the city, both sides of the river and District C. At the intersection of Franklin and St. Claude, there is a large pile of trash. I'm assuming it's trash. Is it trash?
It's an encampment.
So it's not trash. Well, I thought it was a ban. Okay, there's a large pile of items on the neutral ground. We've been getting a lot of calls about this. This weekend, a lot of emails. What could be done about this area, as well as other areas where there are encampments or trash that obstruct the public view? Just makes it difficult for the residents in that neighborhood.
Thanks for the question, Councilmember King. When it comes to debris on the neutral ground, where there aren't persons inhabiting the space, it's pretty straightforward. 311. As I mentioned with Councilmember Harris earlier, we're pretty good about responding to this 311 requests. When it comes to encampments, there's one on St. Claude right at Franklin Avenue. There's a second one on Franklin Avenue at North Claiborne. We have worked with the Department of Health, the Department of Sanitation to let those efforts for doing cleaning sweeps, sort of take the initiative, and we follow along. So it's normally efforts led by the health department in coordination with sanitation and parks and parkways. That my understanding, and I don't want to speak for those departments, is how encampments which are occupied by individuals are being addressed at the moment. Actually, I have an email out to the Department of Sanitation, Department of Health, and the new homeless czar to address the issue at those two locations in particular, because what I've seen in the last 2 years in this position is that generally the Department of Parks and Parkways and other departments, through efforts of the various departments and just the way that these encampments tend to develop, they have not generally been on city neutral grounds that are grass covered. And they have not, if they are in parks or playgrounds, we have the ability as a department to get those individuals relocated and to get the encampments cleared out. And so my email to those groups is to say, hey, this is something new, and we need to address housing for these individuals and address the issue that we haven't previously seen on this scale. I'm aware of the issue.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, Councilmember Green.
I don't have a conclusion, but the business owners who are around those encampments are suffering. The encampment at the corner of Franklin and St. Claude is, I can't use a word other than the formation of it is ridiculous. I'm just gonna use that word. The bottom line is that that's not exactly what we're here today for, but since Councilmember King brought up the issue, and I'm gonna just tell you, I made a call about it myself. I just want to have a general announcement. I'm glad to see a homeless czar, if you will, and I appreciate Councilmember Harris and his entire council for making it available. But the impact that some of the encampments is having on economic development in our city, but also on residential development, is something that we really have to confront this year. Because I'm driving down Canal Boulevard, and there's an encampment at Canal Boulevard near the cemeteries. I'm driving on Franklin Avenue, and of course, as you mentioned, two of them. And what I'm asking is for those who work with individuals who are without houses, whomever it might be, please understand, if you can, the impact that it has on people who live there and who do business, for example. If you're going to help, if you're going to come around and you're going to serve food, maybe in addition to serving food, you can help clean up and also recognize that there's a little bit more than the food that needs to be provided. And I know that sometimes it's going to get into the point where it gets a little bit controversial, but I feel for the businesses that are at Galvez and Franklin. I feel for the businesses that are at Franklin and St. Claude. I feel for the businesses that are on Claiborne Avenue that can't do business because people can't park across from their businesses. And I encourage our homeless czar who's watching this to recognize that there is an impact that even goes beyond those persons who are unhoused. And I want to work with him and also the community. But if you come by and you just provide food and you don't provide guidance and you don't provide support, then in some respects you do badly for those persons who are there. And and pick up the trash. Councilman Thomas is right. You can help out in that regard. And that's as Christian a thing to do, for example, as it is to provide the food, to help and work with those persons who are there. The number of encampments that are increasing in our city, I just hope that we can do something about it soon. But for those who are motivated, who really want to help those citizens out, when you see the new encampment at the corner of St. Claude and Franklin, and you go inside and you see the unsanitary conditions, the beds that have the wrapping that are just terrible for somebody to have to sleep on at night, please don't just serve food. Go and help people. That's all. It's not a parkways issue, even though it is kind of on a public thoroughfare like that. But in time, we have to get to the point where we recognize that we're doing a disservice by not addressing the longer term needs of those persons in those situations. But they also have a responsibility to the citizens and the people around them too. And I'm talking about those who are in the encampment. It's one thing to be in the encampment, but it's another thing to have 40 bicycles that you're selling and repairing, and you put out a sign saying that you're doing so. I don't have any sympathy for that. I have sympathy for persons who are unhoused, but not people who are really disregarding just all kinds of the general rules and the people around them too.
And I think Councilmember Green, you brought up a good point. And I know in the senior leaders meeting with the mayor, I think that's Orleans and Claiborne, all the bicycles for sale sign up there. I know that code enforcement made a move and we removed all of those.
Right,
so we're working with all the departments to try to, solve some of the problems we get out with the homeless encampments.
Right. And I know that it's not under Park and Parkways, but I want to say that I thank you all for doing that. And I saw that, and I know that the council members who represent that area, myself and King, have called about it a couple of times. And I know in district, all our district council members know that there's a problem. I don't have necessarily a message, but now there are scooters there. Scooters. It's going beyond bicycles to scooters. And that's just not fair.
I'll-
And I'm gonna leave those words like that. I understand and I sympathize, but organizations that say that they are working with individuals who are in those unhoused situations, many times are not. It's inexcusable to have bicycles with signs during repairs, or to have now scooters coming in place after the cleanup has been made.
Let me know when the roller coaster comes.
I'm gonna tell you, it's gonna expand. And, look, at the end of the day, I don't really have a conclusion, but I will say this. It goes beyond decency in my respect to be able to address a situation, and hopefully it doesn't continue to proliferate as it is. I want to work with those who are unhoused. I have a concern with those who are unhoused, who sell bicycles and repair them, and now have scooters in place. And now also take over in certain areas where I think that there is some flexibility where they could be somewhere else. And I encourage them to use the services that are there. Odyssey House, for example, has a clinic down the street and additional beds. I know it's on our homeless czar, but it's an important consideration that we all need to look at. That's all.
Yeah, and I know I can't speak for Department of Health or the other departments, but I know there has been some movement on Calliope, Annunciation under the bridge to close down some of those encampments.
And just one addition, Councilmember Green, Councilmember King, that I forgot to mention, we've also requested input from the law department as well, so that we can get clarification on what the Department of Parkways under the current ordinances is allowed to do. You know, I spoke with the gentleman at St. Claude and Franklin the other day personally, and you know, we're always firstly approaching them and asking them if they've been in touch with housing services. And so as encampments spread to areas that they previously haven't been, it's just a matter of the departments adapting and currently working within the framework to get the individuals housed, but also to address the expanding encampments.
Thank you, Councilmember Green. All right, thank you all for all of your work. Mr. Burnside, I know, has a public comment. Mr. Burnside, I also want to thank you for being here because we went through the budget process.
Well, you're the one that twisted my arm. You said
I
something
know,
a long
I know,
time ago
I
about
know.
blah, blah, more blah.
Yep.
So here I am. And I wasn't expecting to address homelessness, and I got 2 minutes. So as all of you know, I was homeless for 8 years, and it's a sensitive subject for me. Because my father's still homeless and he's 83 years old and he collects a social security check, but he can't sleep inside. He has to sleep outside. So an old lady in Tucson lets him sleep on her front porch. So he's behind a fence and nobody sees him and all the rest of it. But there are people out there with PTSD and all kinds of things that don't just sleep inside easily. And some of the places that you get sent to don't have really great reputations. So everybody's got a side on this. I'll point out that the law department apparently convinced everybody to not pick up the Mardi Gras stuff because apparently tarps aren't defined and ladders aren't defined with regards to platform. And this is why we don't move fine, upstanding, fighting middle-class white people off our neutral grounds. But when we find somebody that doesn't have access to a lawyer and can't debate whether a ladder is a platform and points out that tarps aren't defined in our law code, we back down when they fight. So I see it as picking on the little guys. And when it comes to picking on the little guys, I'm not in favor of it. That pissed me off. So if you really want to nail the encampments, go nail the guys that are sitting there in St. Charles and making a living out of guarding people's spots so they can collect plastic beads. Some people crazy, some people hungry, some people desperate. You want to pick on people, go pick on the rich and powerful first. Then you can come kick the ass of the little guy.
Thank you, Mr. Burnside.
I'd love to talk to you about that afterwards, because it's also important to recognize that many people are dying under the bridges, and whatever the solution is, we need to get a solution. But I can't go and attack the person who's on St. Charles Avenue selling the beads, but I can go and work with, not just feed. I can go and work with those who are without houses, but they also have a responsibility to the people who live near them too. I'd be glad to talk to you about it.
Thank you. We have 2 online comments. Yeah, Mr. Shai, this is what I think I'm gonna do. We're gonna post them online, just because they're not voting items, and I want to make sure we're not unduly holding up the departments that are here and present today. Thank you very much. Thank you all for being here.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. All right, EMS and then fire. All right. Good afternoon. Thank you for your patience.
Well, thank you.
You can see we're
We'll take
excited
all
about our
your
budget.
Questions out of your system already. We can.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. It's, I always tell people you're smart, you're smarter to go towards the end
That's right.
when we get more tired.
Well, thank you for having us today. If you don't know who I'm Bill Salmeron. I'm Chief of New Orleans EMS,
And I'm Dr. Meg Marino. I'm the Director and Medical Director for New Orleans EMS.
Thank you for being here.
so we're going to go through our quarterly budget status as well as some other stuff. So get So before I get to that, I just wanted to kind of go through as a department, just to remind people of who we are and what we do and our call volumes and kind of everything else. So on average, we run about 69,000 calls for service a year. So about every 7 minutes, somebody calls for an ambulance or a medical emergency. And so we respond to that. When we compare that 10 years ago, we ran 55,000 calls back in 2013. So now we're up to about 69 to 70,000 calls for service. So obviously, you know, with population growth and return to special events and other things, our call volume is certainly going back up. From a transport perspective, we transport about 40,000 people to a hospital. That's about 58 to 60% of our call volume. And then 60% of our call volume is considered to be emergency. And so someone is suffering from a medical emergency and they do need some type of intervention and an emergency transport to a hospital. And that's our job. That's what we do. We save lives. And so we are the municipal 911 EMS provider for the city. That's what we do. That's our job. 71% of our calls are considered to be medical. And so that's someone having a medical emergency, short of breath, heart attack, whatever it might be. And then 29% of that is trauma. And so as someone who, you know, got into a car accident, was shot, stabbed, you know, fell off a building, you know, fell off a ladder, whatever it is, that's the breakdown of our calls. A few notable stats that we have, we work about 500 cardiac arrests a year in the city. We normally do about 1 or 2 cardiac arrests a day. And so we are, you know, as a city, as you know, we have a lot of health problems. We have a lot of health disparities, a lot of comorbidities out there in which people, you know, tend to be a little sicker here in the city. And in the South, you know, we eat good. Our hearts aren't the best. You know, we eat rich food, and then that just kind of catches up with us at some point in time. As far as trauma, we have about 1,400 trauma activations a year. So that's someone who meets a certain criteria. That means they have to go to a trauma center to receive care. And so that's someone who is in a bad car accident or who is stabbed or shot at a certain point of their body, have their certain sort of vital signs after their injury, that they're transported to a hospital. We do about 112 what we call them STEMI activations or heart attacks a year. That's when you're actually having a heart attack. You go in, you get a stent or something else in the hospital. And we do about 600, 700 strokes a year. So we do have a lot of different medical conditions. Narcan, I know Narcan has been a big topic of discussion recently. And so we just last year, we administered Narcan to 1,788 patients. So 1,788 patients, we administered Narcan. And then we're also administering the Narcan leave behind kits. And so we left behind about 100 Narcan kits last year. And those are patients that we go, we respond, we wake them up. You know, we bring them out of their overdose. And then we leave them with a Narcan kit, or we leave their family with a Narcan kit if they refuse to go to a hospital. We can't force you to go if you're within your right mind, but we're going to leave you some information. We're also going to have our nurse case manager have your information that they can follow up later on. We're also working with a DOG grant, partnering with Odyssey House to do that follow-up care with that overdose refusal. And so hopefully that'll get kicked off this year. As far as billing, we bill out about $65 to $70 million a year. So we definitely are a revenue generating department. The average net revenue is anywhere between 19 to 25 million, depending on how much of the call volume stays ours. Prior to COVID, we were about 25 million when we were able to collect all that revenue. during COVID, and right now we're at about 18 and 19 million because we're giving away about 23% of our call volume to mutual aid. So those are private ambulance services and other providers, and it's not our call anymore. So if I don't hold the call, I don't collect the revenue for it. And so I think people forget that we are not a service that's funded by taxes. We are a service that's funded through our revenue. So we are a revenue neutral department. And so that's really important to remember. The more resources that we commit into our department, the more that we can be more of a stable financial revenue source and a revenue center for the city. And that's where we are. And that's where we need to be at. The payer mix for us, we're about 73% Medicaid, Medicare patients, 12% private insurance, and 15% self-pay. And so if you know anything about Medicare and Medicaid, they don't have the best reimbursement rates. You don't make your money on Medicare and Medicaid. And so we certainly work with our billing provider to work with those patients on the best solutions to pay off their debt, payment arrangements, whatever it might be. And so, we definitely, billing is a big part of what we do. As far as staffing, we're at about 71% staffing right now. And I'll go over that a little bit later on in our staffing presentation. We do supplement our staff right now. We have for about 2 years with our Acadian ambulance contract. They provide on average about 3 to 5 units a day, depending on our staffing needs. And then during Mardi Gras, they provide up to 10 to 15 staffed units within our system to provide that 911 support. And so I know earlier today, there was a vote to, for the contract for finish off 2022. And so we appreciate that. They were also awarded that contract for 2023, which we're working through. As far as the fleet has always been a challenge for us over the years. I know an ambulance is a very complicated vehicle these days. It used to be very simple and now it's not, right? It's got a lot of moving parts and pieces and computers and all kinds of stuff that goes into it. An ambulance might cost anywhere from $200 all the way up to $500,000, depending on what type of truck you buy. Right now we're at about 22 to 40, 22 out of our 45 ambulances are in service. I will say that, going into Mardi Gras, we realized that we weren't going to have enough trucks. And we talked to the CAO's office and EMD early in the conversation was November-ish of last year, say, hey, Mardi Gras is coming up and we're not going to have enough trucks. At that time, we had about 12 or 13 trucks operational. Most we can get on the streets was 17 out of our 38 trucks. And they were out for various different reasons. A lot of it was COVID-related supply chain, workforce issues, things like that. And so thanks to the emergency declaration for, city vehicles, we were able to procure a number of ambulances in January, which thank goodness, because that we would not have been able to do Mardi Gras without those trucks. And so I really appreciate your support with that. That was definitely something that was needed. I emphatically appreciate Courtney and the CAO's team when it comes to purchasing vehicles and making the process where it needed to be at. And so in January, we purchased, 12 new demo ambulances for totaling about $5 million. So that was a significant investment into our department. We just also agreed to purchase 5 more demos that is supposed to arrive this month and next month. And then the additional vehicles that we have, as far as our cars, vans, ambulance carts, rescue trucks, a whole bunch of investment in that. Definitely is, that's about $2 million more and that was invested into our fleet. And then, we have an open order with Fraser Ambulance for 20 ambulances, 10 of those procured in 2021 and the remainder in 2022. And so they're having trouble buying chassis, which is the bottom part of the ambulance. And so we just met with them recently to just change around that contract to buy whatever chassis you can buy quickly and try to get those trucks on the street a lot sooner. And so that's about a $6 million investment. So you can see that, the administration has been very, very agreeable to making these investments in our fleet, moving forward. In the next 2 years, we're going to have a completely new fleet, right? All of our trucks are going to be replaced. We're going to have a whole new fleet, hopefully a good fleet replacement program in which we're going to be able to, every year purchase so many vehicles and swap those older vehicles out. And so, without a vehicle, we can't do our job as the nuts and bolts of it, right? So, we don't do things on foot. Everything we do is with a vehicle. And so vehicles are a really important part of what we do. And so, again, I appreciate the administration's support on that. They heard our call for help, and with your help, they were able to identify the easy way of getting those vehicles procured. And so we appreciate that. All right, so going into our budget, as you can see, we're currently in the green, and so that's good. And we're not overspending so far. And so we do also see that the overtime spending obviously was higher during this quarter because of Mardi Gras, as far as the overtime, as well as the special rate of pay. And this is always a time of year, other than hurricane season, if we have storms, that we have a significant amount of overtime that we have to incur to put those personnel on the street. Personnel wise, budgeted 115 FTEs, which is 143 individual people. If you look at the prior to us working with the CAO to have just a bigger picture of where we are as far as a department, our average number of FTEs prior to that was 156.5, which is 176 bodies. So we have a combination of full-time as well as 0.75 and 0.25 employees. So that's the 176 employees. And so if we take that and on the chart, you'll see we have a number of positions that not only are EMS related, and so we have EMTs, advanced EMTs, paramedics, as well as the ranked positions. We also have civilian positions that we have incorporated more into our operations over the past 2 years. And so our IT positions, our finance and contracts, those used to be medical positions. We converted those into civilian positions because those weren't really, you don't need medical expertise to manage a contract or a finance system. And so we wanted to try to diversify our workforce with those civilian positions. As well as this year, we brought on a social services worker, or basically a therapist or a social worker, to work with the mental health of our staff. And so I know the fire department recently have done that. The police department has had that for a while. And so we're excited to have that position on board. And she's working directly with staff on both resiliency and also response to any critical incidents or just stress related with the workforce. And so I know Dr. Marino, you might say a little.
That's something that we've noticed is a need for a long time, and we're grateful for the support that's allowed us to create this position. We're one of the only EMS agencies in the country that has a dedicated mental health provider. But we do see suicide rates among EMS providers much, much, much higher than the general public. And so we are taking a proactive stance in trying to help our providers who are suffering from PTSD or other job-related mental health issues. So we're really grateful to have that resource.
Can I ask this question? It says budgeted FTEs roughly 116, but actual FTEs are 143. Is that because the budgeted number is wrong?
It's the 0.25 because we have the FTE equivalent, which is 1, and then we have a number of 0.25 and 0.75 employees.
Okay.
And so like 4.25 equals basically 1 FTE. And so
okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I might talk to the CAO's office, but because I think here's what I'm concerned about. The impression that this leaves to the naked eye is that, oh, we have all these extra employees.
We agree.
With EMS, we want you to get the number of employees that you need.
No, we agree. And definitely when we communicate that, we always communicate the FTE and then the actual head count. And so people know that there is that difference, right? And so what we do also, as we are recruiting right now, if we can't find enough full-time staff, we may have someone that might want a PRN position or a 0.25. And so we'll actually convert
those full FTE positions to 4 PRN positions if we have numerous people. Because look, if I can get 6 shifts a month from you, it's better than nothing, right? And so we end up converting those positions back and forth as we see, people of what they want to work, what hours they want to work. So
Right now, we're operating with only 60% of our needed staff, which also contributes to the increase in overtime.
Right, and also contributes to having people who feel burned out and subsequently, not only because of the hard work that you're doing already with fire and OPD, but also needing probably somebody to speak to about their burdens. Okay, thank you.
thank you. As far as vacancies and requisitions, so as we spoke, we have 33.75 vacancies. 15.25 are EMTs. We have 1 advanced EMT position and 16.5 paramedic positions open. Again, like we talked about, we have PRN 0.25 positions that are in that mix. So our goal is to have an EMS academy or a new hire academy every quarter. And so we recently had an academy started in December and ending in January. That brought on 3 paramedics, 2 advanced EMTs, and 6 EMTs. And so we're excited that we do have some new hires. Our next academy, we try to target 10 employees in each academy. And so we do try to get a mix, whatever mix we can get of EMTs, advanced EMTs, and paramedics. We are diversifying our levels more as far as trying to get really anybody in the door that's licensed. We do have the ability to put basic life support units, and the advanced EMTs, which is the middle level between EMT and paramedics. They can do some advanced procedures, IVs, medications. We are expanding that ability, right, to expand our advanced life support units into the field. And so we definitely are doing that, which we are one of a handful of services that have identified that as a an improvement, and that we're doing that, right? Because we always used to focus, well, we need 2 paramedics in every truck, and that's how it's not that kind of world anymore, right? And 40% of our call volume is potentially non-emergency or non-life threatening. You can do that with an EMT or an advanced EMT and focus those paramedics on those true life-threatening, time-sensitive calls. So pending requisitions, we always have some holders just to keep the list open for EMT, advanced EMT, and paramedic. We have 2.25 physicians open. Those are deputy medical director positions that we normally currently we have 2 deputy medical director positions that are 0.25. We're adding 2 more to support that program. And then we have a captain's position open, which is and we're tracking 5 departures that we believe are upcoming, right? And having conversations with our staff, it's mainly for reasons of, school or life or bringing them somewhere else. We have a lot of spouses that were recently accepted into med school throughout the country. So we have a few people leaving because of that. So too bad they couldn't stay here and they can go to Tulane or somewhere, but so some pay initiatives, just kind of go over where we've been with the pay initiative. So in 2023, obviously we had the 5% increase in base pay for all classified and personnel. In March, next month, we're going to have our retention pay come out for our EMTs, paramedics, and advanced EMTs. So that's the $1,500 or $4,500. And then we're going to have some new FTO and preceptor pay rules. And so to expand our ability to train new employees and also to bring folks in that are going through paramedic school, we have to put more people on the street to train those individuals. And so we have a very limited FTO group. We've expanded that FTO group, but we've also created a sort of an entry-level FTO position of a preceptor to do those EMT and paramedic schools and bring them in. And we want more people to ride with our ambulances to get a feel for what it is and come work for us, right? And so by expanding the preceptor ranks, we're hoping to bring in more students to do that. Additionally, We also needed some more educational personnel to support an increase in in-house training, as well as for the fire department and our personnel as well. I'm sorry, you're on 2022. I skipped a slide, didn't I? Sorry for the 2022 stuff. So before 2023, sorry, let's go back. Sorry, let's go back to 2022. In January, we did shift differential pay, the 2.5% if you start after 2 and 5% if you start after 7. So we also did varying pay rates based on your a salary study back in January. So we certainly appreciated that. In July, we also started paying people for all of their required training, which we've only really paid to conduct the class. And so instead of you paying $100 for the class to get a card, you basically would pay like $10 for the card. And so we changed that. And so now we pay you for your time for training. And then October of last year, we had the 5% cost of living lump sum payment. So there a lot's been done last year and this year around pay initiatives. You know, we as a department, we're one of only 3, or actually, if you count Gretna, 4 municipal services in the region. So we, you know, our main competition for staff is private based. And so private ambulance service or hospital based service. And so the one thing that they have the ability to do that we still don't have the ability to do is to provide significant pay, sign-on bonuses and things like that we're not able to do. We are limited as far as being a municipal service with staying with retention pay and other incentives that are within civil service code. And so I can't compete with $50 to $75 an hour that a hospital's paying somebody or that a contract is paying somebody. And so, you know, those are just things that we just chalk up to a loss, but we do need to continue to make sure that our hourly salaries are at least competitive. And then we can, as a municipal service, try to, within civil service rule, just create those rules that provide that additional incentive that's, you know, legally within the municipal structure, right? And within civil service. I think that we're doing better. Our hourly rates need to come up a little bit. Most likely, we're going to do a salary study this year again to make sure we're staying competitive. And then also what incentive pays need to be included to keep people with us. And so the retention pay was a good start. Certainly the payments going out this year, as well as the annual increases. What we're hearing from people is, you know, other places, you know, definitely the annual increases is what drives them places, right? You know, every year at some point you're going to get a raise. And so, you know, we'll work through that during a salary study and see what our competitive salaries are within the region, but again, we are a municipal service and it's tough keeping up with these private services that have the ability to pay a lot more with a lot less rules. So ongoing, you know, as new employees are onboarded, they now receive a uniform allowance when they first get hired. So that's new over the past 2 years. So when a new employee comes in, we give you, after you've completed your academy, you get $750, and then you get $750 at the time that everybody else gets it as well. Of course, the anticipated annual salary increases of 2.5% over 24 and 25. And as I said before, we'll continue to conduct the salary studies to make sure that we maintain, you know, comparison salaries within the market or competitive salaries within the market. Some of the things that we're doing, we are working with the state legislature this year for a statewide EMS supplemental pay bill. That's House Bill 97 and House Bill 100. And so Representative Bagley from Stonewall, Louisiana, which is in Northwest Louisiana, has introduced those pieces of legislation that will hopefully move through the session this year. That won't take effect until 2025 if all goes well and the pieces of legislation remain intact the way that they are. So it's going to take a constitutional amendment to add us to the supplemental pay similar to police and fire. It's proposed that it would be a $500 a month allotment to all statewide municipal full-time EMS employees. And so it's not just us, it's across the state. And so we hope that goes through. I know that there was some questions about, you know, how is the process around civil service and hiring, and are we getting the positions that we need? I will tell you that when we ask for positions with the CAO's office, we don't get any pushback at all. We certainly have a great working relationship. When we need positions, we ask them for it. It's in the system and it gets taken care of. So certainly no issues there. And as I talked about before, we are also expanding the use of basic life support and advanced EMT levels to expand the ability to respond to calls for service and different types of calls for service. As I said before, 40% is potentially non-emergent calls, 60% is that more emergent call, which 60% is still high for a service. And, you know, we have, like I said, we have a very busy service. All right, one-time funds. So we received 1.8 million in ARPA allocations for equipment upgrades, and that does not involve any vehicle-related expenses. And so far, we've committed 394,000 to that. And so as we are actively every day having conversations to get quotes, we're trying to stay with current city vendors and contracts so that we can move the process along without having to go through too much procurement. So a lot of what we can buy is already on state contract or other things, but you know, we certainly are trying to make it easier by utilizing contracts that we can use pretty easily and not go through any processes. And that is it. Do you have any questions at all?
Anybody? Nope. All right. Thank you all very much.
I have
Oh, sorry, Councilmember
Councilman
Thomas.
Thomas.
No, just wanted to thank Chief Samaron and his staff and my the other capacity in my other life before I worked with him and his team with one of the divisions of Dick Wolf's team. And I think we need to know, Chairman, that some of the best film and production people in this country say that Chief Samaron and his staff, from their COVID protocol to how they work with the industry, actually some of the best in this country, and they work in all of the major cities. So it was just good to hear that, you know, the department and there's a group in our community that's second to none when you talk about the service that they deliver. So I just wanted my colleagues to know that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Councilmember Green.
And I think that was a good segue into me to also say thank you all for the work that you do. In my district, for some reason, we've had such a significant number of those special call outs of special weapons and tactics, and sometimes it's forgot that you all are there as part of that. And all of the safe responses that we've had to those have to do with not only the police department, but with your work too, and being readily available. So I just want to thank you all for all the other things that you do, but also quietly responding in a way that doesn't get into the media much, and helping to secure situations where we've had favorable results thus far. So thank you for that. And I hope that during this year, we can somehow have fewer numbers of responses that you have to make, that, you know, people will be educated on the issues involving, you know, drug use and a way to avoid accidents. We're doing our part here on our council to just remind people of that, but thank you for your work.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Burnside. I'll start for you. Michael Eric Burnside, 2215 Felicity.
Given those
Your
extra
full
seconds.
2 minutes.
You're a generous man. Thank you, Joe. There's a smile on my face where it needed to be. In regards to little tiny stuff, and then maybe a generalized comment at the end. Anticipate annual salary increases of 2.5% in both 2024 and 2025. I don't really think it's realistic. I mean, inflation's hitting like 5, 6, 7%. So you guys need to at least tread water, if not increase. I am glad to hear the state might give you guys supplemental pay the way they do the police officers and the fire officers. I think that's one ballot initiative I might vote for. As far as learning that you guys don't get any tax money, I have to admit I was shocked down to my toes that you're a revenue neutral event. I don't think too many people know that. And I think they should know that, because the whole idea of government is to help people that may or may not be able to help themselves. So we have ITEP and we have all these industry outreach programs that help industry that can't help themselves, like our insurance industry just got like $49 million or some crap. So we're helping everybody, and we certainly should help the sick. So the idea that you guys aren't getting any tax money is shocking, quite frankly. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Burnside. Thank you all very much for being
Thank you.
here today. We appreciate it. All right, last but certainly not least, an OFD. Good afternoon. Floor is yours.
Good afternoon, council members. Good afternoon to the public. I'm Chief Roman Nelson, Superintendent of the New Orleans Fire Department. To my left is Deputy Superintendent Elbert Thomas. He's over administration. And to right is our new fire administrator, Tamikia Dunkley Edmonds. She comes to us from various positions around the city, but she has been a tremendous resource. And I just want to highlight her because she's really helping us. You know, in the fire department, we're very good at speaking fire, but it's hard for us to translate that to the general public as well as the city administration sometimes. So she's been a big help with that. Also with our staffing and budgeting and really working on getting that right. And we'll talk about that a little more as we get into the presentation. Going to our budget snapshot. As you can see here, under personal services, 102,838,725 remaining. Other operating, as you can see, we spent a good bit of our other operating budget already, catching up on some expenses that carried over from last year. You know, the supply chain issues and delays in getting things and working with the city budget timeline has been challenging, but we're doing pretty good. And then overall with the total, we have 105,028,546 remaining. And overtime year to date, we're at 1.23 million. Again, that's a little less than an entire quarter, but we were budgeted 6 million for the year. So we're pretty good right now. This was a good quarter as far as overtime normally runs for the fire department at the start of the year. Very few vacations and things like that. Firefighters like working Mardi Gras because it's a fun time of year. It's good overtime. But we expect to see our overtime rates fluctuate as we get into the summertime and seasons when the vacations are a little higher. Next, going to personnel. So looking at our personnel, so this says budgeted and actuals, FTEs by position. So Councilmember Jerusalem, to the question you asked earlier with EMS, the reason these numbers seem skewed is because this year the administration, remember they eliminated basically all vacancies at the time that the budget was done. And that was based on a snapshot from early in the year around April, May, I think. So that's why these positions at 625, but if you go back to 2022, our actual budget positions were 655. So the administration has been very good. As we talked about earlier, the plan is that instead of having money sitting in departments' budgets who couldn't hire, to keep that pool kind of flexible, but we've been doing pretty good at hiring and we have not had any challenges with hiring the positions we need.
Thank you.
So just to
I,
talk
I
about.
want you to say that again for Councilman Green.
Right, you know what's coming. Great jobs at the city of New Orleans, all paid benefits, retirement and health.
Absolutely, absolutely. And so we've been doing pretty good. And just a couple of the vacancies on this page before I go on to the next snapshot. Like our information technology specialist 2, that was a vacancy we had. We've got a contractor working right now that we're planning on doing a contracted hire. With that, the IT positions have been kind of challenging, but we're interviewing a second IT specialist this week that we're looking at. The fire prevention inspector vacancy, we have someone slated to start in that position on April 3rd. And so we're doing pretty good with the hiring right now. Well, I'll talk about the fire recruits as we go on. One other thing that's not listed here that I wanted to highlight is we were able to onboard a mental health care specialist exclusively dedicated to the New Orleans Fire Department. As we talked about before, post-traumatic stress is now presumptive for firefighters in the state of Louisiana. And so it's really important for us, not just for that reason, but just for the members' health and well-being, to have someone there every day focused on their mental health. She's been working with our safety chief, going around meeting all of the firefighters. We want to have somebody that they're comfortable at calling when they have an issue, somebody if they need to get referred to additional help, but having that point of contact every day that they know they can reach out to if they're having any kind of mental health care issues, or if they're just having a bad day and they want to talk to somebody, you know, she's there that to have that trained ear to be there available to them. So we're really excited about that. And she is hitting the ground running and doing a tremendous job already. So we're very happy about that. One of the things while we're talking about this, when we look at our firefighters, you see our firefighter number is looks extremely high when you look at the 222 to the 253. But as we talked about earlier, that's short of our 2022 number, and that number also includes our SAFER grant hires. And CAO Montano has been on me. He wants me to remind the council so there's no sticker shock in next year's budget that next year the SAFER grant ends in February, so we will have to assume those costs of those additional firefighters that we have under the SAFER grant. So just wanted to put that out there. Next slide, personnel, vacancies and requisitions. We talked about some of the administrative positions, 30 suppression positions. What we're working on right now, when you look at these vacancies and the captains and apparatus operators, we're realizing right now we're kind of firefighter heavy in our staffing allotment. So we've been working to properly adjust our staffing numbers and present to the administration. We think we need to promote more apparatus operators just off the top. And then maybe a few other positions, but just in our current staffing model, we've been hiring a lot of overtime for operators because we're short-staffed on operators. We got out of whack somewhere in our budget process in previous years, but we want to get that back on track. You know, as people moved around, those vacancies never got back in operations. And so that's some of the things we're working on so that we can really clearly show the council and the public how our staffing model works. And when we talk about overtime and the need to hire, that it's easy to see where that money is going, where those positions are, and why we need those positions and those overtime dollars, sometimes in lieu of positions, sometimes to go along with those positions. The fire prevention positions, as I said, we're hiring a new inspector. The chief's position is still vacant. It's been listed for a couple of months now. We've only had one applicant, well, one person on the register who's from California. We interviewed him over the phone. Would have been tremendous if we get him, but he's making about 3 times as much with his current salary in his current position. So we're looking at tweaking that job description with civil service and reissuing it and see if we can get some more interested applicants, and possibly may have to look at some other alternatives with that. And I talked about our compliance positions with IT specialists. So the recruitment process, it's been going pretty good. As we've talked about over the last couple of years, we've been fortunate going through COVID because we had the SAFER grant. We weren't hit with the inability to hire because of the funding shortages that some of the other departments were. We've been hiring pretty consistently the past couple of years, but we haven't really been able to fill those classes like we would want to. We've been doing three classes a year for the past couple of years. We have 25 slots in each class. We've hit it a couple of times, but we've been hovering in that 15 to 20, 22 range pretty much in every class. Currently in this class, we have a total of 15 attendees in the class. 14 of them are fire recruits. One of them is a fire prevention inspector recruit. We try to train all of our fire prevention inspectors and get them certified as firefighters as well, so they know not only the firefighting side and also the law enforcement side and the code inspection side. Graduation for that class is tentatively set for June 26th. And then we tentatively have classes scheduled for July and December. One good thing is that the last physical agility test had 33 applicants actually show up to the test. We've had 50 people sign up for the test, and then only 20-something show up. So this time, I think they had 35 that signed up and actually 33 showed up. So it's good that we're seeing that interest start to pick up again. I think as it's springtime, people are starting to get more serious and look for jobs. And we've been seeing good numbers on that. So we're really excited about the next couple of classes and being able to fill those classes. And out of those 33 candidates, several have already moved into the background and drug testing phase, and others are being processed. Pay incentives, in January 2023, the minimum pay raise to $15 an hour for firefighters went into effect. Also, the 5% pay raise for all employees. And one thing I'd like to remind everyone, when we talk about that $15 an hour raise for firefighters, in effect, gave a raise to every classified operational position under the fire department because of our pay compression. Our pay rates are so close together that it actually bumped up everybody from firefighter all the way up to deputy chief. So we have a lot of happy firefighters right now with the current salaries. Going to one-time funds. Ours is pretty simple. The only ARPA funded project we had was replacement of the fire station alerting system. We're working with OPCD on the procurement of our station alerting system because they're the primary users of it. While we benefit from it and the firefighters benefit from it as far as the alerting and the health benefits, and it lets them know. OPCD are actually the ones that use it, because they're the ones that signal the tone that lets the firefighters know that they're getting calls. And so it has to tie into their CAD system, and they have the resources and the technological expertise to help us with that. So we've met several times, got the specs together. The RFP is actually out right now. It was released, it releases on the 24th, and it will close on April 24th. So we'll be looking forward to that. And we expect several bidders on that project based on the current feedback we've been getting. And that's all we have, short and sweet. Any questions you have, I'd be happy to answer.
Well, in addition, thanking you for all your work, I just also want to say the 401 City Park Avenue, the new NOFD headquarters is a priority of mine. So
ours also.
Yeah. So this is the latest update as of March 21st from Capital Projects, that they opened the bid for renovation. The low bidder came back. It's completed its receipt and review of the contractor's bid document and issued the official intent to award the contract. City will begin the contracting process. Process typically takes 60 days to construction and begin by mid-May. So I hope we stay in close contact about that, because I think that's a good development for everybody.
Absolutely. We're very excited about that finally starting to get moving again.
So are we. Anybody else?
All is good.
All right. Thank you all very much. I was about ready to say, does anybody move? Councilmember Thomas moved, Councilmember Harris seconded, and we stand adjourned. Thank you all very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much.